afternoon. This is a City Commission work session for the City of Largo for Tuesday, May 11th, 2021. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And as we do always, we're going to start today's meeting with a business spotlight for a Largo business.
Thank you, Mayor, and hello, City Commission. Today we have the French Nest Boutique, a retail store that offers an airy ambiance of curated French chic items. Customers can shop from a variety of items such as furniture and home decor, tableware and linens, and fashion and florals. Julianne started the business in 2013 and looked all over Pinellas County and Tampa for a location before choosing Largo as it met all her requirements. The French Nest Boutique moved from the Clearwater Largo Road location to its new location at 251 West Bay Drive in September 2020. Located within the French Nest Boutique is also La Fleur Wellness, offering massages, facials, and body wraps. With that, I'll go ahead and jump into the first question. Julianne, will you tell us more about your business?
Okay.
Anything you want to tell us.
Okay. I really did look everywhere, and I found that this was the best place to have the business, believe it or not. I mean, who would know, but I searched and I looked, and it was the best with traffic and the rent amounts and so forth. I decided this was the best spot, and that's that. Now, to tell you about my business, I really love my business. I love what I do, and the main thrust for me is to help people. Like when they come in, I like to have so many offerings that it could be for just about anybody. Sorry guys, it's not so much on the guys' end, especially since I had to go smaller, but I try to make it where everybody gets good service. We do services as well as just show pretty things and do pretty things. But I really enjoy helping people find what they need or help them in any way that I can, even if it's suggesting they go somewhere else that's got what they want. I think that's my big thrust, is to help others. That's
great. And how do you find your items? Do you hand pick them and go searching for them and bring them back to your store? How do you do that?
Well, I pretty much whatever. It's anything. I go to market in Atlanta. I go to the markets down in West Palm Beach and Sarasota. I pick from various everywhere. You name it. I don't have any rules about that. If it's good and I like it and it's a good quality of whatever it is, I get it. I tend to like the more vintage furniture because it's made better than the new stuff. Not that I don't have any new stuff, but I like the vintage better. And since I've been doing decorative painting since 1990, I like to turn the vintage pieces into something that looks current and astoundingly beautiful. That's one of my fun things. What was the question I was answering?
You answered it.
I got carried away there. Oh, and I don't have any rules about where I find stuff. Wherever, however, pickers, people come and show me stuff they have, and whatever works, whatever fits what I think is a beautiful thing or can work with our decor, I will go with it.
Great. And then just one of the personal questions I love asking business owners is, what made you first want to start and open up your business?
It started a long time ago. I actually started doing shops. My first shop was in 2003, but it wasn't here. It was somewhere else. And I had lived here prior to that and moved to Arizona. And then I had the shop there, and I really enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed finding things for people and making things look really... The joy that I have is creating vignettes. So, I did a little bit of interior decorating and designing, but I really like finding stuff and making stuff look great. And so that kind of got morphed into the earlier things of what I did. So I just enjoy creating vignettes. My shop is not like a shop where all of the cards are stacked here and all of the things are stacked there. It's more of you come in and it's displayed, and that's part of what I love to do, is to create a display that's really pretty when you see it, or color flows all flow together and that kind of thing. Did I answer the question?
Yes.
Sometimes I get carried away and I forget what I'm saying.
And I know you touched on this a little bit, but our second question, why did you choose Largo?
Like I said, I know it sounds sort of negative to say I never would have thought Largo was the place to go, because I primarily always lived in Clearwater. But when I literally did go to St. Pete and to Dunedin and to Safety Harbor and every area, I really didn't find anything that had all of my points that I thought were important in opening a business except the location in Largo. And then when I needed to move from that location and I searched here, I just thought this was like, I always thought downtown Largo was like, should be the place to go. And I really would love to make it the place to go and have lots of businesses in there. I think we need to figure out how to make it more of a fun place to go. There's openings, there's places. I don't know what the issue is, and I'd like to help put things in there that people will want to go to downtown Largo for. But anyway,
That's great. Well, we're glad that you stayed in Largo after moving from your Clearwater Largo Road location.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And what are some of your challenges, if any?
Making money enough to pay all the staff and do all the things I need to do. I have big ideas and little space. So, but I like to. I think it's just working within what I need to, the parameters I need to work within. That's my challenge. Really, I like to think big and do big, but you've got to have limitations, I guess. That's probably my biggest thing, other than letting people know where we are, letting people know that we exist and what we've got and so forth. And I do promotion in magazine and papers like the HBL, which is the Harbor Oaks Lifestyle magazine. I think that's the one. I advertise in there, and I also do the Bee and the Leader and all those newspapers. So I do advertising, but I think I'd like to figure out a way to do more that doesn't cost so much money. That's a challenge. That's the challenge. Okay.
And our final question, what can Largo do for you?
Okay, I know I'm supposed to know the answer to that one. Maybe help us be a little more visible, and that kind of brings me to one of the things that I was going to say.
Yeah, go for
Can
it.
I do that? I was thinking that maybe along the main thoroughfare on West Bay, like downtown, or even before, even further west and maybe further east, do things like I've seen in Dunedin and other places where they have maybe signs or some sort of banners or something that promote the local businesses or events, and have more events. I want to actually get some more events going at the Ulmer Park, which is just up here, which is right downtown, and get people coming down there and so forth. And that's going to require some help to make that happen. I personally work 7 days a week, all day long, currently with what I already have on my plate. So I couldn't possibly do that myself, but I've been looking around trying to find someone who can do some sort of art events or something there. And I think we should make it easy for people to do those art events or whatever, anything to bring more people downtown, and also then to get more. I think if more people were coming downtown and shopping down there, more businesses would want to come down there. So I think that, and putting up signs that promote what's down there for people that are driving by. There's a lot of traffic that goes back and forth there, and some of them will stop and go, oh, I saw it was in, and I stopped. But I think if there was more promotion for the businesses that are down there, that it would help to then get more businesses down there. And that was that on the banners thing. Any other suggestions? Oh, you guys do a newsletter. I can't remember if it's monthly or weekly, in an email that comes out. And I think if you also could feature a business in that newsletter, it's usually a little more dry, and it's important data, but it's kind of dry. You
Feeling
agree?
good.
You agree? Is that why we're laughing? Because it's true. Yeah, it's a little dry. So maybe featuring some businesses or doing something like that might be kind of a little more interesting, making a little more interesting pictures, maybe, feature the owner in the business or something. That could maybe be a nice thing to do. Or other opportunities. And maybe also doing, I don't know if this is even feasible, but maybe a paper newsletter that goes out. I don't know if that same one goes out. That gets another expense. I probably may not be on the budget, but that might be another way, to help and stuff. Okay.
No, those are some great ideas, definitely. Thank you for sharing those. I definitely wrote some down to go back to the thinking table. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but the French Nest Boutique is open Monday through Saturday from 10 to 5 and Sunday from 10 to 4.
Absolutely.
So for more information, you can visit lafleurwellness.com or find them on Facebook under French Nest Boutique. They can also be contacted at 213-880-6888. So thank you, Julianne, for being here. And now we'll open up to any questions from our mayor or commissioners.
Thank you, welcome, and thank you for the suggestions. I think those are pretty good ideas. Something that we used to have at Ulmer Park was a little market that they did. It was kind of led by a citizen, so I'd like to touch base with you maybe after, and I'll give you my card, but if we can come up with an idea of maybe finding someone who can spend time on that.
Exactly what I've been trying to do, because I did hear about that, and I thought, that's a great idea. And I've tried finding people who have experience doing it, and nobody's really jumped up yet and said, yes, let's do it. But I've been working on that. But
Yeah, I'd love to share it, because something I've been trying to do is get a couple, with the band shell down there, the shelter there,
Yeah.
some local group bands to come.
Oh, yes.
COVID kind of threw that out of whack, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to see if we can do something like that with.
I think that could be done.
We also had some people at one time were doing little art things down there on the sidewalks and stuff like that. So I thank you so much. And like I said, I'd love to touch base, because it's kind of difficult. Government, gets into that kind of stuff and so many things. But bringing a business in with outside perspective is a great approach. So I really look forward to working with you.
Thank you. And what was your
Smith,
name?
Michael, it's not
Okay.
made up.
All right.
It's an alias.
That's today's name.
Thank you. Commissioner Holt.
I just had a quick question. So if somebody was looking for a particular vintage item, do you do that kind of, it sounds like you don't have much time to do stuff like that, but if
I used
somebody.
to have more time.
Yeah.
I don't know when I got smaller.
I mean, when you
it
said
got
7
worse.
days, I hadn't looked all the way through it. I was like, yeah, it really is 7 days. So if somebody was looking for a particular item, they could come to you and
Ask if I had
ask
it or if I
had
could
an
get it. for
idea of how or where they could
Yeah,
find it.
if I know where they could get it, I'll tell them. If I think I can keep my eye open to find it for them, I'll recommend that. Or if it's a lost cause, but I'll also give them ideas where they can look and stuff too. Yeah, I like to help, so that would be,
Great.
even if I don't have it, I'd like to help.
Great concept. Thank you.
Yep.
I wanted to say, it's such a cool little place. Like you said, there's not a whole lot of stuff for me in there, but I know a lot of people that could buy a lot of stuff in there. It's really, like you said, it's not laid out like, here's this section, it's just a nice, peaceful, cool little place to go in and shop. So thank you for bringing that
You've
to.
been there.
What's that? Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I've
great.
been there. Secondly, I wanted to ask you, I'm familiar with where your location was on Clear Largo Road. I want to know if the traffic is more or less as far as people in and out of your store where you are now.
Okay, so there's 2 or 3 aspects to that, to answer that, because where we were before, we would get a lot of traffic stop-ins. People would come in, this might sound strange, but I'm going to tell you, it kind of would make me feel like we were helping people. People would be going to the hospitals for their family members, and some people would come in and go, oh, I'm so glad you're here, because my so-and-so is not doing well or dying or whatever, and this just makes me feel much more happy and not so bad. So I felt that was a really good thing, that I was creating a nice environment for where people could go and not have to be so stuck in bad news, But in terms of just general traffic, I felt like more people would stop along that road for some reason. I don't know why that is, because there's just as much traffic going this way as there is going that way, but maybe they were not as much of a hurry to go home or go to work, or, I mean, I don't know. But I feel like I got more drive-by traffic that way, although people now they'll come in now and go, oh, I thought you had closed down and now you're still open, okay. So I know that people are finding us that used to know us, but just in general drive-by, not as much stopping people. And I don't know if that's just the nature of what they are. I mean, I'm willing to get out there and while they're stopped in traffic, do a survey. But, because they're stopped in traffic a lot down there. However, and I know you're laughing, but I was serious. Okay. But I think that I get people finding us that hadn't found us before, but the actual just driving by. I get some people now from Benedict's restaurant, and now that Midori's there, a few ladies after they get their hair done, and they do a great job in there, by the way, they come over to shop as well. So we've been there since September. How many months is that? September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April. We're into May. It's 8-9 months later, we're starting to get a bit better of a flow of people, but it's still not quite
Yeah,
up
and I guess
to
it's a
growth.
tough 9 months too, because there was
And it's
like
been a tough 9 months.
global pandemic or something
Yeah,
going on during
exactly.
those times.
Something strange like that.
One thing that I really appreciated that you mentioned, or you said, was you wish that we could make it easy for people to do functions like the market in Ulmer Park, and that's something I've been kind of pushing hard for a long, long time, is, let's make it easy for people to host things there.
Yes.
So we're still working on that, but I think that we're moving in the right direction for that as well.
And speaking of those, I'm about to do a tea party for the Women's Club Largo, Women's Largo Club,
Largo Women's Club.
that's the one. And in conjunction with the library, Largo Library, to get more people. And we're going to do an outdoor tea party in the park there. So it's a good thing to do little events out there.
I was just going to mention, when you were asking the difference in traffic, I know for your former location, I ended up coming in there because at a time there were a few more stores and such to stop in. And so it was just kind of the expedition, to go out there and say, okay, when you are looking for something unique and different,
Yeah.
there were a few places along there to stop
Absolutely.
and check it out. So
Yes.
I think that might have been kind of the difference
That
as well.
That is another difference, and I do agree with you on that. There's more little shops.
Yeah.
Not a lot as there used to be. There's
Right.
fewer, but there's still some good ones over there.
Sure.
And I'd love to see more of them along the
Mm-hmm.
West Bay corridor.
So that probably was a while ago. Yeah, when it was quite a few.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there was quite
Yeah.
a few before.
It's kind of a cool little
Oh, yeah,
shopping area.
lots. I think I counted at one time 12
Mm-hmm.
from here to a certain ending point on Clearwater Largo.
Yeah, you wouldn't know until you were over there,
And I know.
and then it was just
I know.
a little dangerous, but
I know.
good.
I know. I feel like I've kind of upgraded into a new location, but there's not as many businesses there, so I really have to create it on my own. Hey, we're over here,
Sure.
Yep,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks for coming out today. I'll say, kind of add on to the mayor's comment. So my wife shops at your place,
I think I saw her in there.
as well as gets her hair done at Midori, so that's now the most expensive block in Largo for me. So I'll just say that's become pretty my wife's happy place, I guess. But so, and then to add on to Commissioner Smith's comments, I used to manage Largo Feed across the street from where you're at.
Oh, yeah.
For a long time, and one of the things I was active in was trying to promote the businesses downtown. So there's a lot to do, but I would be happy to help with Commissioner Smith as well as you to get some of those things going again. I think that's a great place, and I would love to see, probably not as much as you, but love to see some things going on downtown. And I want you to know that I think everybody here really wants you to be able to succeed as well as that entire area. So please use every asset that we're able to provide. Commissioner Smith made a good comment that sometimes government, we can get in the way of helping you guys out. So we're trying to streamline some of those things, and we'll, absolutely want to see everybody succeed down there. So please use us when you can.
Thank you. And if I can just make a comment, I really appreciate this body being interested and willing to communicate with us guys out there on the front lines, so to speak. I really appreciate that you all care that what we have to say about it. I think that speaks loads for Largo.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was one, thank you, and full disclosure, my wife has spent money in your shop.
Good to
All
hear.
these-
So I don't need to promote to you guys anymore. Okay.
All these secret shoppers out here. But I was curious, a couple things that you mentioned. First of all, do you think you have pretty good synergy with the other merchants downtown? I mean, when you talked about having a tea party, for example, for the women's club, I wondered, have you ever thrown an open house like that for the other merchants in the area? Like maybe the dance studio or some of the other places, they might funnel business to, you know?
An open house, like you mean inviting the other businesses
Yeah.
into my place?
Like you're having that tea party, just a thought.
No, mostly because they know I'm there.
Okay.
I think not that it's a bad idea. I think we should all all of us have a little thing. But Benedict's is a restaurant and they do their own thing. They're out of there by 2 or 3.
Now, I'm
And
thinking more of so they could be ambassadors for you, you know.
oh, they are.
When the parents come down and drop their kids off for dance, do they
Oh,
tell
yeah.
them to go up to your shop?
I don't know if they do, but I've had a lot of girls from the dance studio come over. In fact, we're right in where they used to be.
Yep.
So some come in and go, oh, I used to dance in here, you know.
And then my other question was more from what Can Largo do for you is more of a question. Do you feel that you're well informed on what the city's plans are downtown for things like City Hall and or other developments in the area or events in Central Park? Is that working, that communication?
Let me just tell you from this end. All I can tell you is what I've heard or what I observe or whatever. And quite honestly, I keep hearing flip-flop. I mean, we don't know what's going on. We hear that it's going to happen, and then we hear, no, it's not going to happen, or, oh, this, and some of the businesses were upset because now they're getting kicked out, even though there's going to be businesses allowed to be down below from what we understand on the ground level of some of the buildings on the street side. I'm just telling you what I know.
No, that's what I'm asking.
While we hear that, that's way down the road because they're having to leave and go find somewhere else. So, and I'm not like judging or anything. I'm just saying this is what I've been told by the businesses that have had to find a new spot, and they don't know because some of the locations on Clearwater on West Bay are not very inexpensive. Must have been that the ones they were in were less money than the ones that are currently available. There is building or shop area available, but they're empty. And my only thoughts are maybe, and it's not your guys' fault that the owners want to charge more money, that people don't want to go in there, but that seems to be a big kind of a thing going on, that there would be businesses, but they don't want to, and part of it could be COVID at this time, because really my big data has been only since COVID on this area, other than observing from afar. But being firsthand, it is more since COVID started, because that's when I moved. And what I've seen is people they feel like they can't afford the rent, or they just don't know if it's a great location or something. I would tell them it's a great location, but I can't speak for the rent, you know what I mean? So they have to make their own choices on that. But that's kind of what I've seen is the guys who may or may not have been in business that had to leave, whether it was a good business or a bad business, I'm not going to say. I don't know. I'm just saying as far as they go, they felt that they couldn't find something, and they couldn't wait until a more expensive new building is built to go into something that's going to be even more pricier than what's already there. And I'm not saying that to be negative, but that's just the reality of it, you know what I mean?
I'm kind of looking at ways to improve community, because you've got a stake in the downtown.
Yep.
We have a stake in the downtown, and we're very big on strategic planning, and we want to we hope to see 5, 10 years down the road. So I think perhaps that we should have a way where if you had questions or we're looking for some answers on where we're going or where we hope to go, that you should have maybe one person on staff or somebody you could, direct and get a consistent answer. 'Cause
Yes.
you can write the mayor's office, you can talk to any one of us, of course, but, if you know what the plans that we have for that area, that allows you to communicate to your customers and your fellow merchants
Right.
and so forth.
And
So
make
I see some
plans.
opportunity there, especially since you seem very positive about downtown.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think downtown should be, I think it has potential. I think it has a lot of potential. I don't know I haven't really researched enough to know what's holding it back. I only know the little bits that I communicated, that I don't really know everything there is to know. I think that I've tried to look for some people that I thought would be great to go into certain empty premises, and that didn't really go anywhere. So I don't know personally. All I know is I can just keep trying to find people to go, because I think it would be good to have more businesses down there. I mean, it couldn't hurt. Like you had pointed out, the other location had lots of small businesses and places for people to go shop. I mean, the girl that does the wedding dresses was further down on West Bay. She's now just moved in across the street from us. So that was good for her. Wedding dresses, that's great, but how many of you in this room are going to be looking for a wedding dress?
Well, my daughter will
No.
be in
Oh,
January.
okay, one. We got to take her here. But I'm just saying, wedding dresses are a very small window of customers. I'd like to see some that actually can open up a range of, of customers for everybody, But I don't know exactly how to go about that, other than to try and keep, my eyes open for anybody I think might be good in there. Maybe we could do some sort of a promotion for downtown Largo. Come into Largo and open your business here, and I don't know what, but make it, something they want to do.
Well, I like your spirit and enthusiasm, and I hope it's contagious.
Well, thank you very much for being here. If you haven't been to the French Nest, I encourage you to stop by, even if you're there with your wife.
And I'll try to get more guy things. I did have more guy things on Clearwater Largo, but this is half the space, and I had to pick and choose. Sorry.
Well, if you plan it right, you can go in and have a nice massage.
That's right.
While-
While your wife's that's exactly it. While your wife's
That's what I would
shopping, you
recommend.
can just relax. So when you come out and she said, I spent $1,000, you're like, oh, that's nice, dear.
Right.
Part of the words that can never come out of my mouth.
You should have a therapist on staff.
Well, thank you very much for being here.
Thank
And thank you, Isabella.
Thank you for having me and
Thank you.
caring enough to care.
Absolutely.
Now we'll move on to something a little bit less exciting, the annual financial audit presentation.
Yeah,
Try and top that one.
bring it. Yeah, you're going to have to bring it.
Yeah, same enthusiasm. Tough act to follow, tough act. So with me today is David Alvarez, who's a partner with CRI, our external auditors. We're going to break the presentation into two parts. David's going to go first, talk more about the audit process, and then we're going to switch seats, and I'll get into more of the financial information that talks about how Largo is doing financially. Before I turn it over, I'd just like to thank David and his team for doing such a great job under extenuating circumstances this year. Auditing is never easy, and it wasn't any easier this year with the pandemic. So they were very organized. They worked with our staff here very well, and I think they came up with another good product. So thank you very much,
Thank you.
and I'll turn it over to David.
All right, thanks. So thank you to the mayor and the commissioners for letting us present it today. Want to return the thanks to Kim. He mentioned the pandemic. He didn't mention that the city's also going through a general ledger ERP conversion, so a major software conversion, which the finance staff is heavily involved in that process. So they had a go-live date of the day after the audit was done, which
It's like a perfect storm of asks on the finance team. And I think in working together, we were able to get the audit done on time with a bunch of competing priorities. So thank you to their team. They're always great to work with. So in my report today, we're going to be, so these are the financial statements for the year ended September 30th, 2020. I see everyone has the comprehensive annual financial report in front of them. Included in the financial statements, as auditors, we issue various reports and letters. The first one is our main audit report. This is where we state whether the financial statements are free of material misstatement, and we gave an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. So auditors don't say things are right, we say things are not materially wrong, okay? And the city, we also give it, at Largo, you guys always have the auditors give an opinion on the Largo CRA. So your audit report looks slightly different than normal audit opinions because we give an opinion on both. The next report is a report that's in accordance with Government Auditing Standards. And this report is a report on internal controls over financial reporting. So if there were any instances of material weaknesses or significant deficiencies over internal controls over financial reporting, they would be disclosed in this report. Also, if there were issues of non-compliance that impacted financial reporting, that would also be in this report. And this report is in accordance with the Yellow Book, which is Government Auditing Standards, and we had no issues to communicate. The next report is the single audit report. The single audit report is the audit of federal and state grants and programs. So at the federal level, the requirements are in accordance with uniform guidance. That's what guides the rules around compliance with federal programs. And at the state level, it's rules of the Auditor General. There's specific chapters in the AG's guide that guides that area. So each year we audit major programs, and it's typically within the way that it works for the city. We audit programs within the home loan assistance program, and then the state of Florida dollars, where the city is borrowing money from the Department of Environmental Protection, the state revolving loans. Because those are very low interest loans, those qualify as state financial assistance. So we audit that the city is in compliance with the rules around those state programs. So we had also no findings in the single audit section. And our audit looks at compliance, but we also have to look at controls around compliance. So in both areas, we had no findings. These next two are required by the Florida Auditor General. So these are only reports that you would see in state of Florida government financial statements. The first one is called the management letter, and there's various paragraphs that the Auditor General has us respond to. And in one area, there's a paragraph that says, do you have other items that would potentially improve financial management? And we had one item to communicate that I'll cover on the next slide. Relatively minor, but we felt it was worthy to communicate to those charged with governance, so it is included in this report. The last one in the back is the local government investment policies report. This is a report where the Auditor General requires us to state whether the local government's investment policy is in accordance with Florida statute, and then whether the local government follows that investment policy. So your investment policy is in accordance with Florida statutes, and you guys do follow your investment policy. So the one area to improve financial management. So during our audit, the city uses actuaries. So they use an actuary in relation to the pension plan, and there's also another actuary in relation to the other post-employment benefits plan. The short explanation of other post-employment benefits, it's referred to as OPEB. OPEB, most governments in Florida allow employees to stay on the health insurance after retirement as long as they pay 100% of the premium. So that's referred to as an implicit benefit. There are some governments that say when someone retires, the government will continue to pay their health insurance premium 50%, 75%, 100%. So that's a other post-employment benefit. Even when there's just an implicit benefit, the standard setters that govern government accounting policies say, well, even if you're allowing people to stay a participant in the plan, that would make health insurance premiums for everybody else higher, even though retirees are paying their own premium because the total health care cost is higher because you have some additional people in there. So it's a relatively small liability within your financial statements, but it is in there. So in auditing, both the pension plan and the OPEB plan, the city sends a census to the actuary that shows here's all the participants, here's their dates of birth, dates of hire, other various demographic types of information. We test that census. In our testing over the OPEB plan, there were 2 people that in our sample that had some differences in demographic data. Then we communicate with the actuary to say, well, what is the impact on the resulting liability? And it's very, very minor. So while the issues that we found did not raise to any sort of issue, it's just something that we're pointing out to ensure that you guys have a strong control process around the completeness and accuracy of the census report. So that was our only finding. The city has changed kind of the review process of that census, and we don't expect there to be any issues going forward. Also, there were no audit adjustments, so we didn't find anything during our audit that caused the finance department to change any numbers within the financial statements, which is always great. This last slide is just required communications to those charged with governments. Auditing standards require me to run through these items, so I will do that now. The significant accounting policies are laid out in footnote 1 to the financial statements. There's been no changes to the significant accounting policies. In the next 2 years, there's some accounting standard changes that there will be some policy changes, but there's nothing that was required to be changed during fiscal year 2020. The financial statements are prepared using estimates. We're required to state what are the most sensitive estimates, and those are listed here. The allowance around accounts receivable, the fair value of investments, the risk management accrual. Kim and I always have a lovely talk around the risk management programs, the self-insurance programs. Pension and OPEB, there's quite a few estimates in those, the calculation of those liabilities, and then the estimated lives of capital assets. We had no disagreements with management. We're not aware of management consulting with other accountants. There were no issues discussed prior to our retention, and there were no significant difficulties encountered during our audit. And that concludes my portion of the audit presentation. If there's any questions on the audit reports and letters? Sorry if my presentation wasn't as fun, but it was great for me, if that makes sense.
Just a question, Kim, can you address how you all corrected those errors?
Yes, the data is going to be reviewed a little closer. It comes from HR, Human Resources, so we're going to get together with HR and scrub the data more thoroughly, make sure it's absolutely correct.
Can you touch on how the Workday implementation will affect that going forward as well?
It should help accuracy, and it does depend on how the data gets entered, because you've got to get the data right when it's entered initially, but it should be a little easier, a little more accurate, to be a little more accurate.
Thank you.
You said there were two instances. How large was the sample overall?
So the population would have been a sample size of 25.
25, 2 out of 25. So maybe a little less than 10%. An auditor would probably get exact on that.
Yeah, so then we would look at what is the impact to the actual numbers, so at an error rate of that percentage, and the severity of the error. If you said someone's date of birth was 1 year and it was 60 years before, it's not not all differences are the same in dealing with demographic data in the census.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So we will switch. So, everyone does have a copy of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Riggs and Ingram audit this report, but this report is prepared in-house. So the Finance Department is responsible for preparing this report, and the project manager is Assistant Finance Director Rebecca Spooler. She leads a really good team of accountants. Everybody gets involved in doing different parts. Obviously, it's a big document. No one person could do this. But, you know, Rebecca does a large part of it. So I just wanted to let you know you have a 5-star Assistant Finance Director who worked very hard, and as Mr. Alvarez said, in the middle of a pandemic and an ERP conversion. So I'm very proud of her and the whole Finance Department team, and they did a really good job. So we're not going through the whole report, which I know you're going to be happy about. One thing I'd like to mention, last year's report was submitted to the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, for review. And they reviewed it in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and all reporting standards. And the City of Largo received an award for excellence in financial reporting for last year. So this year's report has been submitted to the GFOA again, and we anticipate winning the award again. So again, a lot of that credit goes to Rebecca for all her hard work, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and of course her staff too. Everybody's working together. There is a document in this report, and it's called the Management Discussion and Analysis. It's really an executive summary of the whole financial report, which is pretty voluminous, and most people will not make it through this whole report without falling asleep. There's just no possible way. So one of the requirements of governmental accounting standards is to create an executive summary, and that's what the Management Discussion and Analysis really is. It's an executive summary. It hits the high points of the city's financial condition, results of operations, and just for the average person, if they will read the MD&A, Management Discussion Analysis Report, which is in here, they'll get a great feel for how the City of Largo is doing financially, and that's what most people want to know. So I'm not going to go over the whole MD&A, so I'm going to do an executive summary of an executive summary, again, hitting the really high points, and then that'll leave some people time to go through it on their own. So I used traffic lights throughout the report just to bring attention to things. Green lights are good, yellow lights, a little caution, and a red light. We haven't had any red lights in the report in the last couple years. But here's just a summary of financial overview, fund balances, and net position, which are like equity in the private sector. You know, in the private sector, you're always talking about stockholders' equity. Well, we don't have stockholders in local government, so we don't call it equity, but we call it fund balance and we call it net position. It's the same concept. Assets minus liabilities equals fund balance or net position. So some of the fund balances did go down this year, mostly due to the pandemic. However, they're still at a relatively high level. So I still gave it a green light because relatively speaking, fund balance and net position are still looking good, and they look a lot better than we probably thought they would when the pandemic started. So we're still in really good shape there. David mentioned the pension obligations and the OPEB liability. Police and fire pension liability did go up, unfunded liability did go up slightly, as did the OPEB. And I'm going to talk more about the pension a little bit later, but just I gave it a yellow light because that's something we want to keep our eye on. It's a big number, and it's growing a little. It's not a red light, but it's definitely a yellow light, something to think about. Debt. City of Largo has very low debt. And I'm going to show you a little schedule a little bit later, but even at the wastewater level, which the wastewater fund has been borrowing more money to construct capital projects, even with their additional borrowing, they're still in good shape there. Operating results. Another green light. Revenue was a little lower than budget, but it was a lot, not as low as, again, we anticipated. And expenditures were all under budget, so as far as operations, city did good in 2020. And the last thing to mention here on this page is trends. So some of our revenues have not been growing, which has nothing to do with the pandemic. It's just been that way for years. I'm going to show you a graph on revenues. But again, it's something to keep our eye on. Certain revenues are not growing. Some are actually declining a little. That is something to keep an eye on and to be watchful for. So governmental accounting is a little different, and I won't go into all the nuances, but we do have to prepare two sets of financial statements, which is totally different than the private sector. So we prepare what they call the big picture financial statements, government-wide, and the little picture financial statements, which is at the fund level. And I know most of the time we talk about general fund, wastewater fund. Well, this is a big picture of what they call activities. And it's two activities: governmental activities, which is all the governmental funds combined together, converted to full accrual accounting. And so you're getting a big picture of all the governmental funds combined. Business type activities are our three enterprise funds, which are, again, all combined together. So you're getting a really big 30,000-foot view. So highlighted, and this is equivalent to a balance sheet, but notice it does not balance. It's the same concept where you have assets, liabilities, and equity, which in this case called net position, but it's just presented a little differently. So in this statement, you take assets minus liabilities equals net position, which is equity. We also have some things called deferred inflows and outflows, which I won't go into. But if you notice, assets are much higher than liabilities. The blue line is much higher than the red line. And then equity actually grew a little. That's the green line at the bottom. So all in all things considered, from a financial position statement, the city is in good shape. Now, towards the bottom, there's a couple numbers that are highlighted in yellow. That's part of net position that's actually reporting a deficit. And that deficit is created by the two liabilities that David mentioned earlier, the net pension obligation, unfunded liability, and the OPEB liability. So in a perfect world, that row would be positive, but because of those two big liabilities, it's showing a negative, and we're going to talk a little bit, not a lot, on another slide. So this is the companion statement to the statement of net position. This is the operating statement. This shows all the city revenues and expenses. Again, everything's combined. All the funds are combined, governmental funds and the business type funds. Again, the blue line is higher than the red line. So revenues exceeded expenses, which is a good thing. And again, a year ago, we would not have projected things going as well. The ending numbers tie back to that prior statement, which is your ending equity. But as far as operating results, it was a relatively positive year. Okay, so let's dig down into the fund level. And general fund is about half of the city's budget. Half of the city's spending is in the general fund. So I'm not going to focus on all of our 28 funds. I'm going to focus a little bit on the general fund because it's our biggest fund. It's half of the information. And fund balance is very important. So here's a presentation of fund balance broken down into unassigned, which means it's completely available for appropriation, and then also committed and assigned. And that's part of fund balance that's already been committed to something or assigned to something. Now, those somethings could be changed, but generally speaking, it's that part of fund balance is already accounted for to do something. So if you notice the final bar on the left, the blue bar, it's a little lower than the red bar. And that means our fund balance, unassigned fund balance, went down this year in the general fund. Most of that had to do with lower revenues from recreation and parks and arts. Performing Arts Center was closed. All the rec centers were closed. Programs were really stopped for a long time. So that impacted revenue. Now, the good side of that is there were some expenses that were avoided also. But this is just looking straight at revenue. What was the revenue impact on the fund balance? But again, notice the red bar is the highest one there. So last year, end of 2019, we had the highest fund balance we've had in a number of years, which was great. It's a little lower this year, but still higher than all the other years presented. So again, relatively speaking, we're in good shape with fund balance. This is a different presentation of fund balance. The orange line in the middle is the target that the City Commission set for the fund balance in the general fund only. This is just the general fund. So the target is what we're shooting for. Notice that the blue line at the top is higher than the target. That's what we call the unrestricted fund balance. That includes the unassigned, the assigned, and the committed. None of those amounts are restricted, but a couple of the amounts are committed and assigned. But notice the blue line is much higher than the orange line, which is great. The gray line is the unassigned, so that dipped down a little bit. The unassigned really is kind of our reserve money that we can use on anything for appropriation at any time. But even though it dipped, notice it's still much higher than prior years. And this is a percentage of the budget. The other graph was on dollars. This is on percentage of the budget. So relatively speaking, we still have a good percentage of our following year budget and fund balance. So let's talk about revenues a little. These are the major revenues, again, just in the general fund. The first group of bars is property taxes, which has shown a nice increase over the years, mostly due to property valuation increases. The second group has shown some growth, but not as steady. That's our electric utility taxes and franchise fees. So that's an area where it's a major revenue, and it hasn't been growing steady. There is some growth, but not that steady. If you look at shared revenue, not much growth there at all. Communication services tax actually showing slight declines. And I like to say if a revenue is not increasing, it's decreasing relative to the budget. So even a revenue that stays the same technically is decreasing as a percentage of the budget. So it's something to keep our eye on. The next group is fire and EMS revenue. Notice pretty nice revenue growth there because it's tied to the budget for fire and EMS. So the county pays us those fees to provide fire and EMS services, and as the budget grows, there's a revenue that grows along with the budget. The last group of bars, notice the last bar is down. Again, most of the other fees, the other charges are recreation, parks, and arts, which again, we took a little bit of a hit on that this year because of the pandemic. But other than that, it's been growing. So again, if we look at revenues as a percentage of our total revenue, notice property taxes have increased quite a bit. It's up about 6% to about 34% of the budget, which means the city's relying more on property taxes as part of their total revenue. If you look at communication taxes, which is the final orange line at the bottom, that used to produce about 6% of our general fund revenue, and now it's below 4%. So there's a major revenue that has really declined. So what's the point here? The point is we're a little less diversified. We're relying a little bit more on property taxes than other revenues. And so if something happens to property valuations, the impact will be a little bit larger than it would have been if we were relying less on property taxes. Again, just something to keep our eye on. This is expenditures in the general fund. Every department was under budget, some significantly. If you look at recreation, parks, and arts, they were under budget about 37%. Again, because a lot of their facilities were closed, they weren't spending the money. Performances weren't happening at the Performing Arts Center, so we didn't pay artists. This helped keep fund balance from going down more than it already did. But all departments did a great job managing their budget this past year. And the city was very conservative. Notice we didn't do a lot of projects like the Parks building, the new Parks building. We weren't sure what was going to happen, and the city manager decided, let's defer that project. So that got pushed into the 21 budget because, again, of uncertainty. Here's some good news on sales tax. This is the local option sales tax, penny for Pinellas. Notice this year, 2020, the penny for Pinellas revenue actually went up a little. Now, part of that is due to a new formula, because 2020 started penny 4. And every 10 years when the penny is renewed, if the penny is renewed, the formula is changed. So our population, City of Largo's population, went up over the last 10 years, so we got a little bit bigger piece of the penny. And so that's really what drove that increase. Had we not had that change in the formula, we would have seen a slight decline in the penny. But again, we're at all-time high, if you notice, going back to 06. 06 was the highest year up to that point. And of course, now we've exceeded it.
That was about 8 point something million, 8.3?
Yes, it was. Yep. And penny 4 started actually January 1. So it wasn't really for the whole year. 1/4 of the year was at the old formula, and 3/4 of 20 was at the new formula. Okay, debt. As I mentioned, our debt is very low. If you look at the goldenrod line, governmental activities, see, we're back to governmental activities. That's all the governmental debt versus business type activities, which is really just the wastewater fund. The solid waste fund has no debt. The golf course has no debt. All the business type activity debt is in the wastewater fund. But on a governmental basis, the city has $2.5 million of debt. 2 big loans were paid off this year in fiscal 2020. The community center is now debt-free. Highland Rec Center, debt-free. So both of those loans rolled off, and they were paid with the penny for Pinellas, penny 3, which is why they were paid off so quickly, because we didn't anticipate penny 4, and we never do, even though sure is nice to get it. So there's the yellow at the bottom, the highlighted areas, again, deal with police and fire pension debt, which went up a little bit. That's the unfunded liability. And then the OPEB was mentioned. Again, that's an implicit subsidy. We are funding the pension debt every year. We are not funding the OPEB debt because it's an implicit subsidy. It doesn't require a cash payment out. The pension debt requires cash payments, but the OPEB is really an accounting number. So most governments that I've talked to are not funding their implicit. If they have an explicit OPEB, which means you're actually paying for someone's health care, then that's something you do have to fund. But because we're not paying for health care, it's really a calculated number to essentially, if retirees were not in our health plan, we wouldn't have those liabilities. The theory is retirees have higher health care costs than the regular working population. Therefore, they really should pay more than 100% of the premium. But they're not, because we can't charge them more than 100% by law. So just real quick, on the pension, police and fire pension, again, the liability, if you look at the bottom line, the 2019, we are one actuary report in arrears because we don't receive the actuary report till April. And we can't wait till April to prepare the comprehensive annual financial report. So we always use 1 year prior, which is allowed by the GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. So the pension liability did go up, the unfunded liability, but a couple things contributed to that. Number one, the pension board has been looking at their pension assumptions and has been changing them. If you notice the yellow highlight at the top where it says current rate and liability, that rate of 6.75% is a major factor in determining what the liability actually is. So the higher that number is, the lower the liability goes, because it's assumed that the assets of the pension fund are going to earn 6.75%. The more you earn, the less liability you have to fund. So if you went back 10 years, that 675 would have been 8.33. And it has been dropping along with all other cities and counties and states, because the investment environment has been changing. So the message really is, even though our liability really hasn't budged in several years, and it's gone up a little, part of that is due to changes in assumptions, where the assumption has been lowered, which is increasing the liability, which then increases the city's contribution. So if you notice again at the bottom, the city was putting in about 30% of pay, police and fire pay, as a pension contribution. And just as a point of reference, let's say there was no unfunded liability. The plan was completely funded, 100%. That 30% would be about 15. What they call the normal cost of the pension fund is about 15% of pay. So every dollar of pay creates a 15-cent normal cost for pension. But because we have that liability and we have to fund it, trying to reduce it, that adds another 15%, roughly. And that's just roughly. I'm done with the MD&A, but I wanted to show you just one schedule. This is in the back of the MD&A is in the front. In the back of the report, the annual financial report, there's what they call statistical schedules. And I know it's a little hard to see.
What page is that on, Ken?
151.
That is
151.
151. Now, I probably...
Got it.
That's a little easier to see that way. So the statistical schedules, I mean, nobody likes statistics, right? But they're, at least most people don't. But it's really good financial information, and it shows trends. And so and this is just one schedule out of the statistical schedules. And if you look at the goldenrod line, that's the total assessed value of all property in the city of Largo, going back 10 years. So if you look at 11 and you compare it to 20, Largo's property values have gone up quite a bit. And then the blue line is your taxable value. So between the two are your exemptions. And there's a few exemptions listed there, the regular homestead, the Save Our Homes, and there's governmental exemptions and then other exemptions. So roughly speaking, if you look at the very bottom, the yellow highlighted line, the net taxable value compared to the assessed value back in 11 was 71%. In other words, 29% was exempt. If you go and look at 20, go forward 10 years, it's 68%. So even though the assessed value has gone up and the taxable value has gone up, the percentage of taxable has gone down. Now, why is that? Well, mostly because of the growth in the exemptions, the primary one being Save Our Homes. If you look, it was 155, and then now it's 829. So as those exemptions have grown, there's less taxable value. And so anyway, that's just one schedule, and other than that, I think we're going to end with a picture. This is Largo Central Park. Which is a great statue in Largo Central Park, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I had a question, the very last thing you were just talking about. My assumption is that the large apartment complexes that are being built will have a positive effect on that number, the percentage of value that is reflected, right? Because they're not going to be homesteaded and they're going to be.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. I had a question about the assumption for the 6.75 assumption for the retirement for pension. Sorry.
Yeah.
And it used to be at 833. What? And you said the 6.75 has been for the last how many years?
Probably 3 or 4. And by the way, they are going to reduce it to 6.5 for the future. And so why are they doing that? Well, the actuary looks ahead, never behind. The actuaries are always looking forward. And the general consensus of the investment community is going forward is not going to look the same as it has in the past for a couple reasons.
So what has, I look both forward and backward. So what has the last 5 years been, if you average that?
Yes, it's been right around the assumption of 6.75. We're not far off.
Right.
But again, they're really looking ahead 30 years because that's kind of their time frame.
Right.
Interest rates have been very low for a long time. And so the pension plan does have about 30% of assets allocated to fixed income investments. And then again, even equity returns have not been as good as they had been historically. I remember 5 years of double-digit equity returns in a row back in the 90s, which nobody projected that, and nobody's projecting that going forward.
And now there's a little dot in front of those 2 digits.
Yes. So most plans have been lowering their investment returns. There's still a few over 7, which is a really interesting thing, because if you talk to someone about their unfunded liability, and the first thing they'll say is, "Oh, mine is such and such," you know. Well, the second question should be, well, what's your assumptions? Because if we took that 6.75 and went to about 8.33, we would have no liability, almost no liability at all. It would magically disappear. Well, why? Because the actuary's assuming you're going to earn more on your investments, which helps to cover the cost. So when people throw around funding ratios, things like that, always, just take it with a grain of salt. It's like comparing tax return refunds. You can't do it. It's fun, but it's not valid. So.
All right, any other questions?
I had a couple things. I can't let you go without something about the pension, but another thing that is always important to me is to consider the universe we operate in. So by comparison to other municipal police, fire, pension funds, how are we doing?
Well, it's hard to say because everybody's assumptions are different. Our pension board has really been on the forefront of taking the actuaries' recommendations and making changes. A lot of, like the state pension fund is still over 7%. So even though they may look better than us, if you just take that assumption and get it down to what most actuaries feel is a reasonable number, you'll still see some plans out there with over 8%, which is, there's not an actuary on the face of the earth is going to say 8% is a valid assumption. So I'd rather look at us. You know, if you look at all of our actuarial assumptions, they're pretty good. We don't have any mortality rates are another thing that's been changing back and forth. We've adopted very realistic mortality rates. The 6.75 is realistic. It's going to go to 6.5, and it might even go lower, but it's realistic. So I like to say our numbers are real,
And-
as real as they can be.
That's kind of what I was hoping you would say, is that it's a proactive approach to this. And the employees, the members, are also actively engaged and fairly well educated in this whole process. And when it comes time for labor negotiations, there seems to be a general understanding of the ups and downs of these numbers.
Let me mention one more assumption, and that's on the amortization period. Most pension plans out there are using a 30-year rolling amortization for their liability. The pension board is actually starting to reduce that because most people aren't in the pension plan 30 years. And that 30 came from, private sector pension plans where people work for 40, 50 years. So actuaries have been talking about that whole, and so what do you do when you lower the amortization? It means you've got to put more money in quicker. But again, it's more realistic. Do you really want to have a pension liability exceeding the life of the participants in the plan? Not really. That's like, borrowing money for 30 years for a 10-year building. That's not good practice. So anyway, again, I think our pension board is doing a great job working with the actuary. You got to listen to the actuary and talk with the actuary. And it's not a perfect science. They'll tell you it's an art as much of a science. So, is it 6.75? Is it 6.35? People can make rational and they can disagree and still, you got to get to some kind of compromise somewhere.
And the other two things were more statements, Mayor. You opened by giving a lot of credit, to the team that worked on this, and I can't let you leave without thanking you for this, because this is no accident. And your involvement with these reports each year, goes back, I won't say how long, but quite a while. But you're doing a great job, Kim, and I appreciate it. I've listened to you. We sit on the policy committee for the Florida League, and Kim talks about communication tax every year and the internet sales tax, all these things. He's very respected in that environment to speak his mind, and he's not bashful about doing that. So, but the other thing, looking at your chart about the general fund major revenues, what strikes me about this chart is we're not at the mercy of these numbers. These are just not given to us, issued to us. You can almost see here where proactive steps were taken relating to the millage rate or becoming more assertive. I don't want to say aggressive, but more assertive with the county about EMS funding. So you can see kind of the fruits of the labor here. It's not just accidental.
Absolutely.
That's all.
Thank you. Along Florida League, when they talk about MBNA and these type of reports, oftentimes they use our report as the example on how to do things. So that's a credit to you and your team. Any other questions, comments?
All right, well
Thank-
done. I just want to
thank
say,
you.
well done.
Thank you, David, as well. Next, we will talk about the capital improvements program.
Right, good afternoon, Mayor and Commission. 1 second to pull things up here. So we are here today for a second work session on the capital improvements program. Just to recap where we've been over the last month and a half or so. As you remember, the CIP was released on April 1st, and we had our joint work session with the Finance Advisory Board on April 13th. The Finance Advisory Board Chair is here with us, Carrie Shelby. We have been engaged in receiving public feedback via our Balancing Act tool on the website, as well as a Finance Advisory Board meeting on April 26th, where we discussed the CIP in greater depth, and they considered the direction that the Commission provided them at the last work session. Their recommendations are provided in the memo, and their minutes were attached to the Commission memo as well. I'll go ahead and turn it over to the chair of the advisory board here to talk about their recommendations, and then after that we'll have a discussion if there's any additional direction from the commission for staff as far as changes you'd like to see made before the resolution and CIP comes before you at next week's meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Will. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I am here to present the Finance Advisory Board's recommendations regarding fiscal year 2022 through fiscal year 2026 capital improvement plan. The board met April 26 to discuss and consider the directions that were given by the mayor and commissioners regarding the proposed CIP. 5 of the 6 members of the Finance Advisory Board were present at this meeting, and all of the recommendations that I will relay to you today were approved unanimously by those members in attendance. To start off, we endorsed the CIP document and the presentation of the information. The improvements made to the online document make it easier to search for information and to evaluate the priorities. Regarding the proposed rate increases, the board supports the user fee and rate increases outlined in the plan. In regards to Largo's golf course, there are 2 recommendations. First, we recommend subsidizing the golf course with the general fund for capital needs. And we recommend exploring ways to increase revenue, such as through memberships, raising fees, and promoting the venue for more private events. The board was asked to consider the timing of implementing police officers' body-worn cameras. The proposed CIP has this program scheduled for starting in fiscal year 2025. Given that there have been a series of events, most notably starting in 2014 with the Ferguson incident, and that 7 years ago, as Chief Understat informed us, our police force didn't think the timing was quite right for body-worn cameras, the board learned that our police force is now ready for them and sees the use of cameras as a form of protection. The board also learned that St. Pete, Clearwater, and Pinellas Park have all implemented body-worn cameras. The board recommends accelerating the funding for this program as soon as possible. In addition, the board recommends using COVID relief funding to allow moving up the timeline for implementation of the body-worn cameras. There are 2 other areas that we recommend you consider for COVID relief funding. First item is to move up the Highland Recreation Generator Project to be a funded project, given that with a generator on site, the rec center could serve as an emergency shelter. The other item to consider for COVID relief funding would be the repairs needed for the Southwest Dive Tower and pool. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. So a few additional notes from us just before next Tuesday's meeting. So if the commission requests any changes to the proposed CIP, we'll make those changes in advance of the meeting, and the proposed CIP will be incorporated in the annual operating budget that's under development. There may also be additional capital changes that come about as part of the operating budget process. There are a few minor corrections that we made over the last couple weeks as we found some things. The stormwater rate in the city manager's memo, the stormwater rate increase at 20% is accurate, and we removed a typo from the long-range financial plan. We also corrected a typo in the project summary, so if you look, everything should look correct there. We'll be providing an updated map in the document on the website. And finally, we did receive some additional information about the body camera project in the subsequent weeks as additional due diligence has been done there. And just wanted to add that we found that there will be an additional cost related to bandwidth as far as data transmission that would be required for folks coming in, and that cost estimate is approximately $84,000 a year. So that was not reflected in the project, but that was something that we would add whenever the project is set to begin. And with that, we look forward to your feedback.
Thank you. Commissioner Gerard.
Great work. I want to thank you so much. It's a big project, and looking out, 5 years, 6 years like this is, a lot of work. I do support, and I would really like to see the body-worn cameras moved up. I don't know if we can move them up to next year, but I'd certainly like to see them moved up. I think wait until 2025 is too long on a number of fronts. One, I think that the officers really are looking for these things because it is a protection for them, and also it just doesn't look good for the city of Largo to be waiting, while everybody else, I don't want to be the last one out of the gate. As far as using the COVID relief money for projects like the pool and the dive tower and other things, we still have to wait to see if that's allowed. The guidelines that the federal government, the Treasury has sent out, don't specifically state that we can do that. We can use it, for certain things to recover lost funds and all that. So the question is, can we say, well, we lost money so we couldn't do these projects, and now we've got this money so we can make up for lost money? But that's still, we have to hear if we're even allowed to do that. So we can use it for potable water, wastewater, and bandwidth right now, and broadband, and for paying exceptional employees and things like that. But specifically for capital projects, we have to wait to see and get an interpretation if we can move forward on that.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Romney.
Thank you. Excuse me. So I agree. Well, first of all, thank you to the FAB members for all the hard work that you guys have done with this over the past couple months. We absolutely appreciate all of your recommendations. And I want to say I agree with all of them except for one. I am not in favor of using general fund money to support the golf course for a multitude of reasons. First, the main one being the golf course has always been an enterprise fund. It was set up to be an enterprise fund. And I think, the reason, in my opinion, that it was set up that way is because it's a very small and exclusive group of people who use that course. If we were to change the operation of or basically, if we were to take that green space that we have and make it into a park that everybody could use, I would be fully in support of using general fund money for that, because then I believe that the taxpayers in the city of Largo now have an asset that everybody can use. As it is right now, they can't. Or they could, but not for, a nominal or free. And then again, or in addition to that, I guess, it's a huge heat spot that sits in the middle of Largo. It's green space, but there are very little, or if any, trees on it at all. So, as a natural resource or green space, it's not really what we would consider to be a useful green space. It's just sitting out there. And then on top of that, all the fertilizers and other things that we have to use, it's not very environmentally friendly. I think there's been a lot of discussion back and forth about using or, having it marketed better. I think if we could do that, that's fantastic. I know there was some discussion at y'all's meeting, reading the minutes, and we've had the discussion. Golf across the country is declining. It's not just Largo. It's not the way we market our course. It's just a natural decline in the sport for a multitude of reasons that we probably don't need to get into tonight. And so we, in the city of Largo, have one of the probably, I would say, one of the best communications and marketing teams that I've ever seen in any business or government organization. If they can't promote it and make it, get to the point where it's self-sustaining, I don't think anybody can. And again, I would hate to, just keep, or to, in 3 years, it's going to be running at a deficit, having to just start putting general fund money into it when we could use those monies to provide services for more people. And again, so, for those couple of reasons, I'm not a fan of using general fund money for that golf course. And I don't think that's the popular opinion here, but that's my opinion. So that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Commissioner Finger?
I agree with the Vice Mayor regarding general funds and the golf course. I wouldn't use those funds for the golf course, and I think though we talked a little bit about that when we had the presentation from ULI. I enjoyed some of their options that they gave us, and most of what I saw out of ULI, it wasn't as leaving. They had a very small space that they would have left for some open space as a park or whatever we wanted to do. So I do agree with that, and I agree with the moving up just about everything else that is on here, moving up the certainly the cameras for the body-worn cameras, and I think it in a good way. I use the word interesting, that the board came to the same conclusion about our proposed user fees and rate increases, since we had a lot of discussion about how is everybody going to feel, especially given the time and such, that you had the discussion and felt that it was also necessary time, the right time. It's just something we have to do, the way to do business moving forward. So I just kind of noted that to myself. I thought that was interesting. So thank you for your work and looking at all of those.
Thank you so much for looking at this and giving us the recommendations y'all did. What I do agree with many here, probably with the police body cameras, is that we should accelerate them. The plan, would be a good idea is coming up with, like we did with the public safety plan, getting something like that accelerated where we can get the financing, knowing exactly where we can fill it in quick and where we can kind of lay it out and come with an idea. I know we're reaching out to Representative Chris to see if we can get some grants there, which we hope. But I think focusing on that and getting it done now, I like what Commissioner Gerard said. I believe it was Commissioner Gerard said. I don't want to be the last one out of the gate on this one, and us look like it. If our police department right now is saying they want this protection also, and I think our residents would like that also, I think this is a great opportunity to take this time and move forward. I still am kind of on the fence a little bit about the golf course. I'd like to see it as a green space, but I don't know about shifting it completely away from it. I think we should. I think residents use it. I just don't. I know cities are getting away from it, but I'm afraid that if we get away from something, and then it pops back up, we lost it. That's something when I came on this commission, when we talked about we were reducing stuff and we were outsourcing the maintenance. I was against that, and now look what we're having to look back and pick up the pieces and go in-house. And I'm afraid to, and I hate to use the word afraid. I don't want us to lose something and as an asset that could impossibly pick back up. And we have out there, it's a green space. People do use it. I've driven by it multiple times, and people are out there. Yes, I guess you could look at it as a certain category of residents use it, but at this moment, I just can't start pivoting away so quickly. I do agree if we could look at the COVID funds once we get the information back, looking at the dive tower and the southwest tower, the southwest or the Highland Rec generator, that would probably be good places to put some money. Something that also kind of came up a little bit, and I just didn't talked about a little bit, was, and I forgot to ask it, was also maybe looking at projects, there was an article in the Tampa Bay Times just recently about the funds that were in the budget that got approved. Maybe looking at a way we can put something in there where when we're looking for a project, like we did with the library, we hire a consultant or a lobbyist or something. I don't like the word lobbyist, but it doesn't seem like we're working well enough to get money this way. If we see a project where we need it, maybe we should start investing a little bit into someone who knows how to talk to our representatives in a way that they hear it. So that's something I'd like to see down the road. But other than that, I really appreciate the report, and sorry I'm yammering a little bit, but I really thank you for your time and the members, and look forward to a better year next year also.
Just to follow up on one of your comments, yes, we do intend to include in the proposed budget for next year funding for a legislative advocate.
Or a lobbyist.
Lobbyist, yes.
Good.
I like that.
Well, they're going to call themselves a lobbyist, so you might as well just call a spade a spade.
It's an honorable profession.
Look, it has a bad connotation to it, but there's a lot of good work comes out of lobbyists in every form of government, so.
Yeah.
What was interesting in that article was they tied in links to the budget proposals. At the very end, every city that got money all had a lobbyist on their side that got that funding.
Correct.
Where here we tried to go up there and talk to them and ask for them, and we got nothing on that list.
Well,
Constitution says we can petition the government.
well, yeah, so, you know, we do. We all work very hard on doing that, but I think just about everybody here has a job outside of sitting here. So we don't have a lot of time, except for John. That's why John talks about the pension all the time.
We have to go hunt.
John's job is the pension. So,
I'm a liability here, I know.
so we work very hard at lobbying or advocating for, because we're not allowed to lobby. So, at all levels of government, and we have a position that we started to move towards that, but I completely agree, and Henry and I have had multiple conversations on this, that if we want to take that next step in working with the government, we have to have somebody in Tallahassee or Washington to advocate on our part full-time. So.
Thank you.
Oh, can I just add, I was just going to add on the golf course thing
Yeah.
really
Please,
quickly.
Let's talk about that more, Ryan.
Go ahead.
Just that I don't think that we're saying right away, like, right tomorrow, that we should turn away from it and not do anything. I think it's that we're trying to be proactive. When we had the discussion with Director Byrne, that let's try those additional things that our marketing and communications team can do. But if that still doesn't, like the membership card idea and things of that nature that people are going to buy into who do currently use it, but if that doesn't create the kind of revenue that we need, then we have to be proactive and start thinking what's next before it's too late, and then we're stuck with having to use general fund, or what do we do now, because it's not meeting what we would expect it to do. So I think we're on that right path of creating something, new programs, however, what we come up with Director Byrne, but at some point then, if we're looking at it going, it's still not happening, what do we do?
Yeah,
Is that next step?
Would
Before it
agree
gets
100%. I think that was a great explanation. Thank you for that, Commissioner Finger.
I drive by that golf course several times a week. It's right around the corner almost from my home, and I drive by it all the time. And I want to say that parking lot is full a lot. It's not an empty place. There are a lot of people who are using it regularly, and so marketing it better, I don't know if you're going to get more traffic there, because as I said, it's already getting pretty close to full usage throughout the day. What I would like to see is if we're going to talk about a membership and maybe raising fees and other things, I'd like to see a hard plan. Well, what should the fees be to be able to support itself? If there's going to be a membership, at what level or what levels of membership in order for it to be able to pay for itself as an enterprise fund. Right now, it's very amorphous. We can talk about all kinds of things, but until I see a hard plan, I can't make a decision. As it stands right now, for me, I don't want to use general fund money to support the golf course. It's an enterprise fund. So what does it have to do to be able to support itself? And we haven't heard anything like that except for some ideas, which is nice, but, so who's going to give me a solid plan that I can look
That's
at?
what we're saying is that we need that first and then see before it gets too late. And then we're stuck
Yeah.
in that position of,
Well, yeah, because this is
Safety.
something that something that the city's been looking at for a long, long time. And now we're just a few years out.
Right, so,
Right.
yeah, I would agree. I think we have done a great job of kicking the can down the road for the last couple of years. We knew this date was gonna be coming at some point, and now we know for sure that 3 years from now, it's gonna be operating at a deficit. So, I would agree, but I think that's the direction that staff is looking for today, is to, do we agree, does this board agree with using general fund or no? And what are the other options because there was, FAB had a couple of questions regarding this. I think there was 3 options or 3 questions that they were looking at. So raise user fees to support operations, subsidizing the fund with general fund revenues, and continuation of operating as a self-sustaining enterprise fund. So FAB said that they would like to raise the user fees to support that, right? So obviously, prior to doing that, there has to be some sort of solid information. I mean, what will it sustain? What kind of increase will sustain? Folks use that course out there, to my knowledge, from the people who came and spoke to us about it, because it's inexpensive right now, I believe. Well, we start raising fees, or you put a membership fee towards it, is that sustainable? Is that something that people would rather do? It's a municipal golf course. It's not, the Pelican in Bel Air, which, so, I don't know. I would like to agree with both the commissioners and say that we need to have a plan in place to make it sustainable as an enterprise fund in the next year or two. It needs to be projected to be sustainable within the next year or two. Otherwise, we need to start making a decision as to what we're going to do with that space outside of that. Now, ULI had some great thoughts on it. I think we had a great discussion with them. I don't agree with all of them. I personally would love to just see a natural park out there with maybe a playground or 2. I mean, there's some underserved communities that are right around the corner from there that need a green space and need some sort of areas for kids to play at. And I think some of the comments that were made on the FAB were getting kids outside of recreation centers and that would be a great spot for that. I mean, there's not a whole lot of kids joining golf clubs right now, obviously, by the trend across the nation. So, I think that the comments made previous were right on point, that we need to have that plan in place. And if we don't have that plan in place and it shows it's not going to sustain itself in the next year or two, then we need to, this commission or whoever's on this commission at that point needs to make the decision as to what we're going to do with that space and moving forward.
Yeah, and I think we should recognize that once it hits that deficit's going to grow year after year after year.
For sure.
So it's not just it's going to be 1 year and it's going to stay steady.
I'd like to point out that the reason that it's going to hit a deficit in 3 years is because of a global pandemic this year or last year. If that didn't happen and the golf course didn't shut down for 2 months, they wouldn't hit a deficit during this CIP. If so, maybe on the 5th year. A couple other things that I think I'd like to, well, first of all, I'd like to say that I'm not in favor of removing a golf course. I think it's a valuable asset. I think that although it does serve a specific group, it's a group of senior citizens that have time to go out and play golf during the week when most of us guys are working or people are working. The playground in Largo Central Park serves a specific population, and maybe some of the people that play golf don't want to pay for the playground at Largo Central Park, but we're going to still have a playground at Largo Central Park. There are a lot of trees out there. I was just there last weekend. I'm not a golfer. I don't go there that often, but I was out there playing. Well, other people were playing golf around me. I was hitting the ball every now and then, to raise money so kids can go to summer camp. And I specifically was looking at the trees, largely because I talked to Mr. Schubert about this last week. A lot of the palm trees are now like 40, 50 feet tall. So I think there could be some tree fund money, which we have a lot of tree fund money, to put some understory there, some younger palm trees to help kind of grow up in between. And there's plenty of big oak trees on that course. Is there room for more trees? I think so. And it would make it, probably a more interesting course and a more difficult course. Like I said, I'm not much of a golfer. But personally, I think that there are some steps that we can take to make it more sustainable from an economic standpoint. I also would like to point out it has been a long time since we had a substantial general fund contribution to the golf course. Probably before any of us were on the commission was the last time that they spent a lot of money on the grounds of the golf course. I think it was before I was on the commission. So it's been a long time since there was a significant general fund contribution. It's possible that we've spent some money on some equipment in the last 10 years. But not a lot. And what we're talking about is the depreciation of the assets that we have there, and how we can get greens fees and membership fees or whatever to help offset that. And I'd like to move in that direction, but I think that as everybody said, with golf being a dwindling thing, it's you drive by there, it's not dwindling on that course. There's plenty of people that use it. And there were kids and young people and a diverse group playing in the tournament, the mayor's tournament. So I think that there's an opportunity to reach out to a more diverse group that's out there, and reach out to younger people with different aspects, and maybe open it up for green space so anybody can go out and walk on a Sunday morning or something. I don't really know. But I don't have any interest in it not being a golf course moving forward, and I'd like to challenge us and challenge everybody to see how we can make that work within its enterprise fund, ideally. I think that was all that I had on the golf course. I'd like to thank the Finance Advisory Board. I think that your review and your recommendations of this document is extremely valuable to us. We spend a lot of time, and sometimes we talk amongst ourselves over and over and over and over again. It's really nice to have a fresh look from residents that are invested in our community, and thank you so much for that. Commissioner Hulk.
Yes, first, Carrie, I would like to tell you, that was an excellent presentation, and your chairing of the meeting is fantastic.
Thank you.
So I enjoyed watching that, and your passion, even in today's presentation and in chairing the meeting. First, on the police body cameras, 110% behind that. The sooner the better. Protects our officers and our city. You have Morgan and all these people out there telling you to sue your grandmother, so we need to protect our officers and our city. I think the worst thing they ever did was allow lawyers to advertise during daytime TV. Second, with the golf course, the conversation was really interesting with the golf course. And the board is several different aspects of people. I believe 110% what you said, Commissioner Smith, about once it's gone, it's gone. I'd like to see us really work out a way to make this work. I've actually talked with people that play at the course and people who don't play at the course. A membership is something that people are really truly interested in, and if we had a couple of events there, we started maybe having food there again, people who don't even play golf would buy a membership to the golf course, just to it's kind of a prestigious thing to have a golf club membership. So it's not even doesn't even have to really be directed, I think, at people who play golf. But it's a start, in the right direction of saving the golf course. It's whenever I read about this, I always picture Back to the Future with, save the clock tower. It's like the big fundraisers but just getting people involved and really getting out there and promoting it back out to our citizens in our city. And as Commissioner Gerard said, there are always cars there. There's always people playing during the day, so maybe we need to, with a membership, would focus something on nighttime entertainment or, just things like that, just anything that, and even, Kim Adams said, the golf course does recover more of its expenses than any of our other recreation programs. So it's there.
With the exception of the Highland Family Aquatic Center.
Well, yeah. He didn't say that here, but yes, we know that. So I just think it's something that we really do need to keep in our city, and we need to make it work. And again, as Commissioner Smith said, once it's gone, it's gone.
So what's the plan then, if and when let's just say if it doesn't turn a profit, if in 3 years or 5 years or 6 years down the road, and not including we are going to have to put a general fund capital improvement on this course. I mean, I think the last time it had something done to it was about $2 million. Did I read that correctly in the CAFR? And that was, several years ago, like the mayor said. So it's due. And I would assume, since it's probably been a decade or so since something like that was done, that cost is going to be significantly more than it was. So,
From my understanding, from the discussion, I think it was 2005-ish. But from the discussion, that was a complete remodel. I mean, they moved where the holes were.
Right.
It was a redesign of the course. And from Parks and Recreation staff, that is not what will be needed in the near future or in the next 5-10 years. There'll be something much less needed, refreshing greens, whatever. Again, I'm not an expert in that field.
So let's say even if it does cost the same amount of money, let's make that assumption, because over a 15-year period, then, the cost of everything has gone up significantly. So even if it's $2 million, then that's the $2 million that we have to put in towards, and then we're going to be continuing in general fund. So it's set up as an enterprise fund right now. We don't have it in our general fund. So either A, we're going to have to change it into a general fund item, and we're going to have to decrease services somewhere else in order to put this in. That's a thought that or a discussion that we haven't had yet. I think you mentioned that it recovers more than any other park program except for Highland. It's an enterprise fund. It's supposed to recover 100% and make money.
Right.
That's the whole purpose of it. So, I think that's kind of a misleading statement, and I know it was in the minutes, and I know that it was said, but that's its goal. That's its mission in life, is to be to run like everybody else's business, right? It's supposed to make money. So, again, as you can see, I'm by no means in favor of using our general fund money for running it as a golf course. If we're going to put it out there and provide services to the entirety of the community, then I'm fine with that. Then that's I think philosophically, I think that's, we're going to have that difference of opinion, and we can move forward with that. But
So if it wasn't, sorry to interrupt, but if it wasn't an enterprise fund, it was athletics fields, right? That the revenue made from the athletics fields went into the general fund. And some, as it is right now, the golf course brings enough revenue to pay for the operation of the golf course year over year, generally. And it's tight, but it's pretty close. But if it wasn't in an enterprise fund, like it is in most cities that have municipal golf courses, they're not in enterprise funds, from what was told to us last meeting. Would it be easier for you? I mean, it would be more. Should we consider removing it from being in an enterprise fund, with still the goal of it making as much revenue as is sustainable and offsetting the cost of providing that asset to our community?
Well, again, I think philosophically, probably not, because the majority of our fields are used by younger people, right? So we have the soccer fields, absolutely the majority of it's used by young folks, which, you know, this is going to sound ageist. So that wasn't my intention. But, you know, we use it for development of, it's a community asset. Baseball fields, football fields, you know, those are, and then to take it out of that, not that, so, you know, we can't pretend that it wasn't ever there. So we have to understand that it came from an enterprise fund and now looking to be a general fund item. No, I wouldn't be in favor of that because at a certain point in the future, you know, right now, 3 years, it's going to cost more than it makes. You know, all of our other recreation programs don't make money, but we're providing a service to our youth for the most part in the city of Largo. And you know, I think development in the city of Largo, the development of those kids are something that we have to, it's our job to do.
I know, I agree with that, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity to get more kids out on the golf course or get more kids out in different facilities. I mean, you look at our community center, and there's a dance program that's there, and there's youth activities there. But during the week, it is a senior center. I mean, it looks and acts like a senior center, and so I think both populations are just as important. In our city.
That wasn't my goal. I wasn't.
No, I understand.
You know, I wasn't. I know that's how it probably sounded when I came out. So anybody who's listening, I'll be happy to respond to your emails later. But
Sure you will.
Yeah, I'm sure I will. So, I would agree that every person that lives in the city of Largo and our surrounding communities are important, and we should be able to provide those services to them. But again, I'm just having an issue with it making money and not making money. So it makes money now to provide the service to a very exclusive group of people. And then, 3 years down the road, it's not going to be making money. We're going to have to take money that we could use somewhere else to provide services for people in the city of Largo, all of the people in the city of Largo, and now spend it specifically on a minute group of people. Now, I am completely in favor of trying everything in our power to make it what you all think this golf course can be. So, whatever we can do. And like I said, I mean, our marketing department is probably one of the greatest, it is absolutely one of the greatest in the state. It's been recognized time and time again.
And I'm not sure how much they've been involved in marketing the golf course.
And I agree with that. And so what I'm saying is absolutely do everything that we need to do in order to get it to that point. But if it can't get to that point, then I am not in favor of moving forward with it as a golf course and spending general fund money.
So certainly, I just want to make one more comment. I think that the reason that the golf course is an enterprise fund is because when it became an enterprise fund, it was making more money than it was costing, including the investment in the grounds and all that stuff. It was making a lot of money. So if I wasn't here back then, but I assumed that it probably became an enterprise fund due to its own success. Am I correct? If anybody remembers.
Yeah, and traditionally, I think in most cities, golf courses tend to be operated as enterprise funds.
They said definitely.
And yeah, it made money for years. I mean, it paid off its mortgage and its operating costs and returned a profit to the general fund. It's obviously not the situation now.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I was just going to say, I'm not really sure where I come down on this. At first, I'm inclined to say I'm not a big fan of using general fund money, as the Vice Mayor has said, for what seems to be a relatively small segment of our community. However, just listening to the discussion and all the points made here, I have to say a couple things. For one thing, it's an asset that we own, and the land itself continues to appreciate. If you were to take this tomorrow and turn it into a park, that doesn't mean your costs go out the window, because there's all the maintenance and development of a park and equipment and everything else that goes along with it. It's an ongoing maintenance nightmare for personnel and general fund money there. And in our planning sessions, we talk about making Largo unique and making it a destination community of choice. Like the dive tower and like some other things we offer, it is something that makes us unique. And as other golf courses in the area close down, perhaps this one gets busier, I don't know. There is that breaking point on fees and memberships that, you get to a point where you can't charge your way out of that deficit. It's just not, people won't come. And as I said before, can we do more to market it? Yeah, but we're not going to market our way out of this either. It'll get to a point where it is at full capacity, or it's being used as much as it can be, and that's just where it is. But basically, all the other recreational opportunities we provide in the city, we subsidize out of the general fund, whether it's a swimming pool or soccer field or whatever. So I'm interested in more discussion on this. I like the idea that we're going to talk about, actually dig into this and talk about what the options are to make it as sustainable as possible. But I'm not in favor of flipping a switch and saying the golf course is gone, because I think we'd regret that at some point.
Yeah, when we talked about it, we talked about all kind of different things that would be great to get more people out there, more different people, right?
Yeah.
So I was thinking that, if you have during the summer on weekdays before whatever time works for the golf course, that's a little bit down times. You bring a kid under 12 and the kid plays for free or whatever, or 9 holes, whatever you want to do, which would check the box for getting more people out there, but it would be detrimental to the bottom line of this enterprise fund that we're trying to keep afloat, right? So I think we need to decide what's more important, making the golf course an asset that everybody can enjoy, or staying in the black and not having to tap into the general fund to refresh the golf course once every 15 or 20 years. That's where we are.
Well, I'm definitely open-minded on it. I've kind of changed my feelings. Having more information certainly has changed my position on it.
Well, as I understand, of course, the FAB, by the way, really great work again. The recommendation was to use general funds to pay for the capital improvements, which I recall hearing are not that great right now. The complete redo of the golf course back in '05 or whenever that was made, but I think it was like the parking lot and some improvements to the building and such, and maybe some general maintenance. So, but I'm going to repeat that it's interesting to talk about this, but until we have some kind of hard figures from the Recreation, Parks and Arts about the usage, what fee structure might be reasonable that people would be able to live with. We're just talking about it, and I would like to see something at least that we can begin to work on, that we can put a pencil to, and see where we can be. Because if we keep the golf course, and by the way, the golf course does serve a very important population in the city, because older citizens makes up a very large percentage of the city, and a lot of these folks are using the golf course. And as I said, it's very popular. It really is. But we have to accept the responsibility that it isn't just one-time capital improvement. It's going to need it again. And what can we do to be able to get it to a point where it can sustain itself again? If not in 3 years, as we said, in 5 years, because the trend is down. So what can we do to keep it going? And as far as the green space, I think it's already been mentioned, there's a lot of fertilizer and a lot of chemicals that go into that land to keep it green. And it's not natural land.
Could I pivot back to the body cameras real quick?
Please do.
Put one on a tree out there at the golf course and see what's really going on. I'm encouraged by the discussion of moving that up in the timeline. And I just want to say, from my previous experience, that sometimes it's wise not to be the first municipality in a game like that. We now benefit from advances in technology. But even more than that, I think I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe the workforce wasn't ready for it, and it was seen as a management, kind of a big brother type of imposition on law enforcement. And I can speak to that as it relates to when the cameras first went in the police cars. You know, there was a lot of pushback on that too, or the GPS technology in the police cars. So the fact that the officers themselves, not only just at Largo Police, but in general, have become accustomed to, and in fact desire this kind of technology, I think is a big benefit to it being implemented successfully. So thank you for that, Gary. Thanks for supporting the idea of moving that up.
Thank you. Any input for Will for next week?
Will's head's spinning already. What are you talking about?
I think we've been pretty clear.
Yeah, clear like mud.
We'll just run with it. We'll see.
Just bring something back to us.
So, as far as changes, it sounds like just a proposal to move those body cameras forward, and that's something we'll work on in conjunction with the city manager for the proposed budget process and the updated fund projections that come there. So, the CIP that you see next week will look a lot like this one, but we'll take that with us over the next month or two.
And the CIP is a planning document, so now you're throwing it back on us to actually decide what we want to do with the golf course.
Albeit,
That's a longer-term decision. I just want to make a couple quick comments on the federal COVID recovery funds. Yeah, the federal government has just released some guidelines in the last day or two, so we'll be taking a deep dive into those to see what we can specifically use that money for. There's a few more restrictions than I think we initially anticipated. So, but we're also willing to be creative within the boundaries of the guidelines that are there. The number that we told you a couple of weeks ago, we were going to get approximately $13.9 million. That was a preliminary number. It's now $12.9 million. So somehow we've already lost $1 million. We haven't started yet, but it's still a substantial amount of money. So we'll be bringing some proposals to you in the near future.
Big.
On the COVID front where we can use it, is there a way, because with the business that was here, where we want to try to get businesses in certain areas and they were heavily hit with COVID, is there a way to keep an eye on it for an infusion to get a business in an area? Where if they lost in another area, or assist them with financial aid to get into a space for a month or two or something like that?
Yeah, we could look at that. There, our recovery group here in the city is also looking at some recommendations they'll probably be making to us for expenditure of the funds. Yeah, and there's a whole lot of other business assistance programs out there that are funded through this money, so we don't want to necessarily duplicate either, but we'll certainly look at that.
We should keep in mind we have to spend that money fast, too. You know, we have 2 years to do
No
it.
problem spending it.
Yeah.
Trust me. We do a great job of that.
All right, thank you. Thanks again.
thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we will talk about electric vehicle charging stations.
So like the agenda and the
Next, I'm sorry, next we're up to CIP.
if you look on the, I don't know, the printed agenda, number 4 is the child park thing.
Okay, so
But-
we'll do park then, because
I don't really care one way or the other. Joan's been sitting there patiently
That's
for the
not the
last
order
20
it
minutes
is
while we
here.
talked about golf courses. She got plenty of
I don't know
information.
anything about golf courses. Don't ask me questions about that tonight.
Wish we would.
Okay. So the purpose of tonight's discussion is to propose an ordinance to designate exclusive minor child play areas within city parks. I think a number of the commissioners have, and I know the mayor has received letters from parents complaining about children and young adults much older than should be in large groups, and in many cases making it unsafe for smaller children for whom the playgrounds are designed to participate. And a number of cities around the country and even here within Florida have approved similar kinds of ordinances. Playground manufacturers design equipment for certain age groups, and if you go to any of our parks, there's a designated playground that it says this area is designated for 2 to 5-year-olds, and this area is designated for 5 to 12. And it means that it's really designed for children generally in those age groups. But what happens sometimes, and particularly at Largo Central Park, but it also happens at other parks as well. But Largo Central Park being right between Largo High School and Largo Middle School is kind of a collection point. And the equipment can be used inappropriately, or they decide to play a game of tossing a football or playing tag, and what happens? Little ones get run over. Many of those same youth are using language that's probably not appropriate. That's certainly something that we've heard from parents. And so this is the second time around. Back in 2015, we proposed a similar ordinance, and there was a lot of discussion, and at that time, the commission declined to move forward on it. And when the mayor and I spoke several months ago about some of the letters that he had received, I said, well, we can certainly come back with a proposal to do this. And so that's what we're here to discuss. Is this the right time? Is this the thing that you want to do to move forward with an ordinance that would basically say a parent, a grandparent, a person who's in charge of children? It could be the babysitter, it could be an older sibling. Obviously, if they're there with a younger child, that's fine. We even have at least one swing. It's called a mommy and me swing, and it's designed to have the supervising adult and a very young child, swing together facing each other. So clearly, we're not saying no one but children under 12 can be in the playground. But I think that this would help in those instances where we have a real conflict. Frankly, our park staff, we handle most of the issues that come up. I mean, a couple kids doing something goofy like kids tend to do sometimes, they can handle it. It's when we get a larger group and they're absolutely, not respectful, and they're certainly not compliant, that in speaking with the chief and the deputy chief, and the deputy chief is here to, certainly if you want a perspective from the police department, we've had this discussion, and they are supportive. They need the teeth of what an ordinance does so that they can, if necessary, trespass somebody who's doing the wrong thing. We don't see this as something that's going to be a weekly occurrence, but when we need it, we need to have some teeth in it. And so I will be happy to hear your ideas and see if you're interested in us coming forward with an actual ordinance.
Thank you. Any questions for Joan or the deputy chief or?
Might be easier to go back to the golf course discussion.
I'm not prepared to answer questions about the golf course tonight.
No age limit on the golf course, is it?
No maximum.
So I'll say, a couple months ago, I received a couple letters in a matter of like 2 weeks. I was thinking it's probably about the same group of kids. One gentleman said that him and his daughter, he picks his daughter up at the middle school, and most days they run over to the playground for an hour of play before they go home or whatever. And he said that for several days in a row, the same group of kids were there using foul language and just hanging out on the equipment and kind of making it so that the kids that were there to play on the equipment couldn't play on the equipment. And the answer that he got was, there's nothing we can do. And so he was surprised there was no rule that disallowed teenagers from just hanging out all over the 2 to 5 year old play areas. And so I talked to Joan. I didn't remember exactly what the opposition was at the time, but I suggested that maybe it's time to talk about it again because it seems to be an ongoing problem. And I think it's like Joan said, it's largely at Largo Central Park, probably because of where it is.
Go ahead.
That was, just, so 2 questions. So I guess that's one of kind of what the mayor just said was, I don't remember when we discussed it, was our concern that did we have enforcement or did we have the ability to enforce, when we discussed it, I guess last time, you were saying it was quite a few years ago.
2015.
Okay, so was the issue of enforcement?
There were several issues raised about, how would we enforce it? Would we be calling the police all the time? Would there be selective enforcement? Those were some of the concerns that were raised at that time.
So how is that, what is different now? What would happen in that situation that the mayor just described? Would that person who is experiencing that, would they call the city so that, or call, I mean, how?
When we talk with PD, we would have signage encouraging people if they're experiencing a difficulty to contact the non-emergency number, the 6730 number that people can call. But it would also, we do have staff in Central Park, not all the time, but most days, and it would allow them also to, and we can in signage say, if this is a true emergency, please call, the 911. We don't now call on a regular basis and we have problems. It's just this, especially if our staff are already there, they can call. They are not capable really of de-escalating a situation once it evolves. And I think, I really sincerely believe, and we talked about this in our discussion with PD, it only takes a few times to trespass a couple of the ne'er-do-wells, that word gets out, this isn't a good place to hang out. There's plenty of space in Largo Central Park for kids to throw a ball, to play. We're, in the process of looking at rebuilding Bayhead and having some, really good options for teens on a regular basis. So I think we're in a position now where we can really handle it a lot better than we could have done.
And so as a follow-up, with the ordinance, then it gives the officers more to be able to trespass. Is that what I'm understanding you're saying then? If it's an ongoing issue with individuals that shouldn't be there creating that kind of ruckus.
And I think typically typically the first line is they come and they talk and they try to de-escalate things and move people along. I mean, I don't think they're gonna send over 3 squad cars and arrest everybody and throw them in jail. That isn't what we want, and surely they don't want. But it does give them those repeat offenders, the ability to say, enough is enough, we don't want you here anymore, you need to move on, so.
Just out of curiosity, is there a time of year, do you find that's more, I'm just thinking with summer coming up, is that busier, or is it just really, it just all?
It's fairly random, I think, when it happens. The other thing, and I just will say this, that many people are concerned, the other thing that it isn't just about teens, it's also about unattached adults hanging around a place where children congregate. We've been very fortunate that we have, not had any awful instances of that happening. But every once in a while, we will have somebody just hanging around who's quite obviously not with children. And if you want to do something to children, what a wonderful place to go where they're all going to be at your disposal. So it really serves 2 purposes. It allows us to kind of control that situation.
Thank you.
Okay.
Being a very young grandfather and spending now time down there with my granddaughter, I have witnessed some of the situations you're talking about. when I'm there, a few kind words from a retired police chief can often, take care of the situation. But I do hear from other parents, and it's not just a matter that the little kids can't use the playground that's there, that it's intended to be used by. It's more than that. It's the language, it's the behavior, and so forth. And I think back when we talked about it before, some of it was perhaps police staffing, and we had discussion about a security guard, almost like the library had, and whether or not the current laws on trespass warnings and the city's authority to issue trespass warnings would suffice. Communication with the middle school, telling the kid, whatever. But you're right. A few encounters down there will make it a less desirable place to hang around if you don't belong there. But really, it's the fear or the anxiety associated when a young parent especially takes a little kid to the playground, and they kind of get run off. They have a bad experience. Likewise with the number of homeless people who wind up panhandling in the park, it's very similar. So I assume that you have worked in concert with the police department to come up with something that you guys can all work with, and if that's the case, I don't see why we wouldn't do that.
Thank you. So, is the way this is presented, there's going to be specific areas of playgrounds that are designated only for certain age groups?
Playgrounds in general would be designated, well, right now, they're currently designated 2 to 5 and 5 to 12. And right now, the main problem is Largo Central Park, but all playgrounds, the mulched area, which is typically because that's the only one we have that is completely fenced in, would be the boundaries of the playground. And so we would be looking at those as the areas where people over the age who are not with children should not be there.
Right. So I completely understand the situation where that arises, I'm sure, where you have some adult who's there that probably shouldn't be around the kids, or in those situations, I'm sure the deputy chief can talk to plenty. My concern though is, and we probably had this at the same, a couple years ago, being a kid who might have been in that situation, 20, 30 years ago, not admitting anything, but maybe has been
Perhaps.
the ne'er-do-well. It's a tough situation. I'm a parent as well. I've been to the playground and I see a lot of things. Sometimes there's kids there that are in bad place and shouldn't be doing what they're doing. I understand that. I think that we all have situations like that. I have situations like that now as an adult, right? So, my concern though is when you start involving the police and my concern is for those kids, what happens down the road, right? So generally, 99% of the time, if the police department shows up, they say, "Hey guys, you gotta beat it," right? That's plenty to deter people, and that's fantastic. My concern is for a minor offense, for using foul language or something that most of us wouldn't want to. Probably all parents don't want around their young kids. Are we going to go down the path of starting law enforcement interaction with these kids? And again, it's nothing against our police department, and I know that's not the intention. There's always unintended consequences. So that's my only concern. Now if we, I know our police department does a fantastic job of being able to bring it down a notch and have I think a greater understanding of what's going on in the community. That's fantastic. But there will always be those one or two situations that where somebody gets in trouble that could have been prevented, right? And I'm I just hate to see somebody starting down the path or being put in the path of law enforcement interdiction over using a curse word at a playground.
I think I can assure you that just the use of a bad word, I mean, I think even probably everybody around this table has at one time or another used a bad word and wouldn't want to be trespassed or arrested for it. Maybe recently, I don't know.
Never in the playground.
But we're talking about a situation that goes, beyond a word, goes beyond just one kid doing something. It's more the as I said, the frequency, it's the size of the group, because there have been days when we have a large group and it really just overruns. And in that case, I'm sure that our police department would come in and say, okay, guys, move on. And, let's get out of here. This isn't where you belong. And in 99 out of 100 cases, for the one case out of 100 where the group decides to really get unruly, then they probably deserve to have some consequences to their actions.
Yes,
And it's always going to be, in every police incident, there's judgment that's made, there's calls that are made, there's discretion that's used. And I have great faith that our police department and our parks department in enlisting the police will use that same kind of discretion to assess a situation.
And so I agree with that. I think, again, our police department, from all the other police departments that I'm aware of course, I'm biased to a large extent, does a fantastic job in almost every situation I've ever seen him deal with. Again, my concern is that if, 13, 14-year-old kid from Largo Middle School or a freshman at Largo High who's excuse my language, a dumbass, because that's what all of us are at 13 or 14 years old. So now I could go to jail for that. But
you're not on the playground.
I'm not at the playground. This is the playground. But it can be. But yeah, I just have a concern with that. And again, you're right. The discretion of our police department is great. They do an awesome job of being able to handle situations properly. That's my only concern. And my other concern, and I think you addressed it at the beginning, is does the call volume go up because people now can call the police on something that they weren't able to before? And that happens. I just don't want people to use it as a free tool to say, I don't like these kids. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't doing something bad, but that's, eventually somebody's going to have to show up. And if it's non-emergency, it goes to the bottom of the list, as I understand, and it might be a little while before somebody gets out there. But that's still adding to the call volume of our police department, who are, yes.
From the PD's perspective, we would have absolutely no intention of arresting a child for trespassing from a playground.
Right.
But when we respond out there now, and we've already talked about it, the egregious situations, every even coming out, there's not every call, we're not going to be the playground police. But those situations when you get out there and you have, the 15, 16-year-old kids that are sitting around cussing and making all the other younger children uncomfortable, the parents don't want to let their children play on the swings because they're over there. We have the ability now just to say, as opposed to just walking up and say, I want you to leave, children challenge police officers nowadays. They know their rights. They can swear if they want to swear. They can say whatever language they want to say as long as it's not inciting to kind of a fight. So they challenge the police, and at this point, we have the ability to say, look, we can trespass you. We give you an ordinance violation. We have teeth. We have some ability to do that. As opposed to just bantering back and forth.
And that's fantastic, and I'm glad that you said that, and because I agree with that, this should be something that is a tool for us that is available for the city. I just want to make sure that all those things that I discussed prior to, and that you and I, or you just discussed, are out there and have been talked about, and everybody kind of understands what the situation is. Now, again, as a parent, absolutely, I would love for, to maybe have a badge where I could tell some kids to go pound sand if I needed to, but, haven't been that kid before. I understand that side too, so.
But now they're all going to be on camera for their parents to see too.
Because you're going to have your,
No, when they get their
body camera, right?
We're not going to mention the hog.
Trail cam.
I won't talk about the hog incident.
It's pretty
Well,
sad. It's pretty
that was a
sad,
long
though,
time
that
ago, man.
We even have to have this conversation because it's like, why, you just want to go up to them and go, you're 15. Why do you want to be in here in the middle of?
Because it's shady.
15 and you
I know.
Because it's got tree cover, it's shady, and there's a place to sit down. That's why.
We have picnic tables, we have those
Yeah,
walls
but
around
it's
the
not as
trees.
cool.
Playground.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned signage. Is there, recognizable, clearly stated signage at the playground areas?
That's
now?
required on every playground, and yes, we do have it, but we will add some additional signage once this is in place so that the people are
So the
aware.
signage is really clear that this playground is for children
Yes.
2 to 12 only.
There's a 2 to 5 section and a 5 to 12. And some of that is, and believe me, every 5-year-old, goes to the 5 to 12, and if they're 4 and a half, they're starting to move over because it's more exciting to be with the big kids. But that is at least partially the playground manufacturers for their own protection. This is what this equipment is
So this
designed for. But
signage-
it is at every one of our
So
playgrounds.
this signage is very clear, right?
Yes, this
Okay.
playground is designated for 2 to 5.
And if I can ask the deputy chief, would an officer have the ability to trespass a kid without the ordinance if the kids, acted up?
We can trespass with no
Okay, so the ordinance, so what additional teeth, would the ordinance give you?
Well, I mean, you have to justify why you kick them off the park. I mean, if somebody's out there just roughhousing around in the middle of the park or using bad language in the middle of the park, you really don't have to keep them thrown off the park. Other than, people are upset and they want to hang around.
So if an officer
You're actually
came,
violating something, and if you have an ordinance not to keep them in that playground, there's a violation of violating the ordinance. As opposed to just generally trespassing somebody arbitrarily, that you have to put on, make a decision on whether you want to trespass them out of the park. That person's wondering why me and not the person next to me. This gives you something you're violating an ordinance that says if you're not 12, you're not under 12 or under 13, you have a accompanied by an adult, you're not welcome. Like,
So by passing an ordinance, and it would add to the signage. So the signage would be there saying, if you do A, B, and C, you're breaking a city ordinance and the police can be called. So that step alone would be new, so even them coming in, and they've already seen the 2 to 5 and the 5 to 12 sign, so by adding the ordinance sign, it at least alerts them that, hey, they're gonna start maybe cracking down here, So that would be the first bite.
The other thing
first
we
part of the
also-
tea.
but there's something that just, I understand that the ordinance can be a very positive thing, but there's just something that bothers me about singling out teenagers again. I was a teenager, and I was a heck of a teenager, and would it be possible, as an alternative, well, maybe not as an alternative, but it may be in concert with this, to maybe designate a little area for, after-school teens together, sort of like the teen center in the library, where they all go?
I mean, they have Bay Park.
Yeah, but Bay Park isn't, but you know what, but that's not Largo Central Park.
Park in Bayhead Park. And that's-
Bayhead,
that's in construction.
Bayhead's under
A lot of-
construction, but it's not Largo Central Park, and it's not there yet,
Well, we did,
I feel I feel more obligated to protect the children. These are kids that are on their way
Teenagers
to
are children,
becoming
too.
adults, and it's time, there's a time to start learning to be responsible. And if we're, to me, this is like, we're saying, okay, so these kids, they're 2 and 5 and 5 and 12, and they're supposed to protect themselves.
I'm not saying that.
But,
I'm not saying that
but
at
you're
all.
saying
I'm
that
just
it's
saying-
okay for teenagers to be in the middle of children that are trying to be
Well, I don't know,
kids.
Commissioner, I don't know where you heard me say that. What I said is that in concert with this ordinance, can we do something for the teens who gather from both schools in the park? Is there something that we can do to give them an alternative to go, so, okay, we have an ordinance, the signage is now gonna say, city ordinance number 40 dash whatever it is. Okay, so you look at, you were gathering here, you shouldn't have been here in the first place. Now we're telling you really can't be here. So how about over here? Because teenagers, by the way, are children. You know, I raised my daughter right through her teens, and she was a trial a lot, but she turned out pretty well, and I don't want to ostracize these kids. They're
I
kids.
don't want to ostracize them, but there are age limits, and there are areas that should be specifically for a child that they should not have to, and their parents should not have to worry about teenagers that are just being teenagers.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's exactly what I said. I agree with you wholeheartedly. But then there are the teens. They exist.
So I'm going to pivot this a little bit and ask a question. Libraries in certain places, pools, they have code of conduct that you're in there, you follow these certain rules, and if you don't follow them, you know, there's a listing of, in the library, if you're using profanity, we warn you, and then we call the police department and use the please leave for the day. And if you come back, then, you know, then it's the discretion of the library staff to call the police and have you trespass. If we already have the ordinance to trespass from a park, why can't we just use a code to put a code of conduct up that we can specifically say, with ages, you said they already have it.
Right.
Here, we could kind of pivot and say, there's the code you're not following, so we're not singling them out in a way that they look at saying, you're just going after me.
I would say, one, if you're in a facility that's different, you have probably a little better capacity to get you out of a facility. When you're in an open park, you have a right to assemble, citizens have a right to assemble. So, you know, you have 10 kids sitting in the middle of Central Park using foul language and just being obnoxious to the others around them. We have the ability to say, address them and tell them to stop. We can ask them, you don't really have to, right? They can do that. But if you're inside a facility, we can ask you to leave that facility. You're not.
Wouldn't this be considered a facility in the fence area?
But there's only one fence.
Aren't you, I mean, you're not saying that, I guess to Commissioner Gerard's statement, if we're specifically talking about the incidents that the mayor received, comments about, are that these kids were on the equipment preventing other younger children from being able to use it for a multitude of reasons, language, or the fact that they were physically laying across it, whatever the situation was. So if PD had to come out and say, because they're not wanting to move, or whatever, even with parks, if park staff is there, they can go use the rest of Largo Central Park, right? Which is just, we're talking about that designated area. So I think kind of like what Commissioner Holt is saying is that you're not ostracizing teenagers. You're just saying this area is not appropriate for them to be laying on playground area. And we're making it so that they have that opportunity to be able to say to maybe, if it was you as a teenager, that it's time for you to move out of this area and go use all of the open space that we have for them. There's a reason for them to be on the equipment, and making it difficult for younger kids. And I'm actually kind of surprised, and I'm sure maybe it's the way we grew up, when Deputy Chief says kids will say to him, call you names and cuss you out and do those things. We just didn't grow up that way. I mean, if you saw an officer, you were like,
I'd be in the nature preserve.
like we just didn't. That was not how. So that's just, to me, is like, just wow. Because we had the respect to, we wouldn't have acted that way, first of all. But, you had respect, and you don't do those things. That's hard to understand. It's hard to understand the differences.
That's why I said it's like, I can't even believe that we really have to
Yes.
have this conversation, because it's like.
Yeah.
Look,
However,
but how you were raised and how you were raised and how I was raised doesn't matter.
No, I'm not
So,
saying.
I mean, that's a silly point to bring up. it doesn't have anything to do with the current situation.
That's true.
Well, no, it's
It does
seen.
to a degree of,
Yes.
of values and respect.
We're not having a discussion about
but-
values, we're having a discussion
Okay, about respect and respecting
Has zero
the
to do with this
space.
conversation.
You know, I'm going to use the example of the library again, okay? The Largo Public Library, which is, you know, one of the most highly rated libraries in the country, has a children's section and it has a teens section. Because when that library was built, it was recognized that teens need a place to congregate because birds of a feather flock together, and it's a very important socializing part of their growth. So, by the way, let me just say, if this ordinance is proposed and if the language is clear and all that, I would support it. All I'm saying is, you know, teenagers, you could say, well, you can go use the rest of the park. Well, it's not the same thing as having my own space, my own place that's for me. And I don't think it would cost any money to designate a place. You know, there's a place for you guys here, for you middle schoolers and high schoolers, to go ahead and nobody's going to bother you, so you guys can do what teenagers want to do, which is to learn how to socialize and grow up. That's what I'm saying. You know, sure, little kids shouldn't have 15 and 16-year-old kids all over their playground equipment. But 15 and 16-year-old kids need a place. And we shouldn't think that we shouldn't treat them like criminals.
You know, I absolutely respect what you're saying, but 16-year-old kids have no business in a toddler's playground.
Exactly.
So it's
I agree with
really
you.
about conduct. It's not about checking IDs at the gate to see who's over the age limit or the weight limit for the equipment. It's really about conduct. And it's about making the citizens, the parents of the small children feel comfortable to go to the park, because if there's a bunch of kids, teenagers, hanging around where they probably shouldn't be hanging around, then those parents are not going to go there anymore.
And I agree 100% with
So,
you, Commissioner.
you know, I'm not a big fan of diverting police resources or giving somebody a record. We're talking about a local ordinance here.
Sure.
It probably in truth would never be written, only in the most extreme would there be an enforcement action. It's more about giving the officer that responds out there to some mom or some park staff that called, these kids are, you know, they really shouldn't be in here, period. Go congregate wherever you want, go socially interact, do whatever you want, but this place is designated for certain age groups. It'd be no different than going down to Target and hanging around in the dressing rooms, you know. So eventually, the police are going to get called, and the police need something to be able to, without making an arrest or taking a real enforcement action, just get people to move along. It used to be much simpler, and I think I have to disagree that it is about the way people were raised and the changing environment here. That it used to be there was some respect for authority, and a parent in the playground would have said, knock it off, go home, or I'm telling your mother. But we're not there anymore. That's maybe.
The parents are afraid to do that.
So, huh?
I said the parents are afraid to do that.
Yeah, because they're going to get all the grief that the cops are getting.
Right. And another point, I think most of these incidences kind of happen in the afternoon when none of those how many gazebos are there?
We have 8 shelters, and with respect to what you're saying, Commissioner Gerard, we do have, the teens do kind of take over those shelters in the afternoon, and that's great. We don't bother them. They sit on the tables.
hang out a lot,
Tables aren't
yeah.
designed, it's fine. That's what teens do. They lay on them. That's fine. And they hang out. They also hang out by the big, you know, the tree, we call it the elf tree, the one that,
Right.
they sit on those branches and they enjoy themselves. And I love that. That's great, and that's part of the reason we're keen on Bayhead. We know they need a place. I mean, we're all about teens. They also sometimes hang out in the outdoor fitness area, which is kind of outside of the playground there. They use that equipment, and they like to hang on that, and that's fine. We're just really looking to separate them from little ones who get run over by big ones. And even sometimes when they're not even trying to do that, they're playing a game of catch football. I was just at Highland this new playground, which is very popular. It's going to start to rival Central Park, with my 2 5-year-old granddaughters last week. And they love, this one piece of equipment. I said, why aren't you on it? And they said, because there's some really big boys. And then my daughter said, please don't be the parks lady right now. You want me to intervene, so I didn't. But it was very uncomfortable for them, and they would not go on that equipment until
Old
the
Commissioner Smith
big guys
used to be
left.
out there all the time. Got him hooked after that one time on the slide.
But I do think, we know, and I think it is true from our department, we need to do something with teens. And clearly Bayhead, we are, moving towards really trying to build a place where they can hang out and just have fun. And I'd love to see that. Whether we can designate a shelter as the teen center in Central Park, we can certainly try that, but I will tell you right now that they use those shelters a lot, and there are 8 of them, 2 very large ones and then 6 smaller ones, and those are often used by teens, and we don't worry, we don't bother them at all. We know they're fine as long as they're just, hanging there,
Yeah.
so.
Top of the train tube too, occasionally.
What's that?
Top of the tunnel.
Oh, the top of the tunnel, yes, that's another popular spot. They like a vantage point, where they.
See the cops coming.
Well, direction. So you'll bring an ordinance back, we'll discuss it again for some time.
I'll
then.
look forward to it.
Okay, thank you so much.
That'll be a good discussion, Joan, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Is that the same night as the golf course?
Dear God, I hope.
Bring dinner with you when you come.
Next, we will move on to electric vehicle charging stations and development.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. We will be discussing an item that was brought up at the February 2nd, 2021 City Commission meeting, and we were asked to bring this discussion back before the Commission to obtain further direction on EV charging stations, possible incentives and standards for citywide implementation. So myself, Alicia Paranillo, and Laura Thomas are here today to present. We have 2 presentations, which we'll try not to make too long, and then we'll be looking for more direction in terms of approaches moving forward and how we implement the standards for the infrastructure. So we can go ahead and get started, and I'll do the slides when you're ready.
Okay, you can go ahead and get those up. And thank you all for your time this evening. I'm happy to start the discussion today with a little bit of a backgrounder. So while Alicia will go into the details of something Largo specific, I'm going to be using an adaptation of a presentation that SACE, the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, one of our nonprofit partners, has used for other municipalities, including recently at the St. Petersburg HERS Committee, which is the Health, Energy, Resilience, Sustainability Committee. So we will work on pulling that up.
Give me 1 second. I'm just trying to figure out which one this is.
While she's pulling that up, I just want to let you guys know, if you thought I had a lot to say about playgrounds and golf courses, wait until you hear about my conversation about EVs.
Did you bring us dinner?
I just ordered Uber Eats. We're going to be okay.
All right.
Whatever, you just let me know what they are.
Perfect. So if you want to go to the next slide, we'll start off really quickly just to, again, acknowledge that this is actually SACE's presentation. Our typical contact, Dory Larson, was unavailable to be with us this evening, so she did allow me to take the presentation and adapt it to our needs. So we just want to acknowledge them and their goals and purpose, and the fact that they also lead the Electrify the South campaign. electrifythesouth.org or cleanenergy.org are great resources that highlight some potential opportunities for accelerating equitable transitions to clean energy, including ordinances, codes, and other incentives that municipalities can utilize to help promote EV infrastructure applications. Next slide. So to start off, we're just going to provide a really high-level general background on different types of vehicles. What we know as ICE, or internal combustion vehicles, a traditional vehicle, does not have any battery or plug-in component. A traditional hybrid vehicle, which is the type of hybrid vehicle that we currently have, is a battery plus gasoline. And so you do not plug those vehicles in. Typically, when you use your brakes and at some other times, the vehicle will recharge the battery and you can use that to help reduce overall emissions. Then you do have plug-in hybrid, where you plug in the vehicle, a Nissan Volt or a Chevy Volt is an example, and you can rely solely on the charge if you charge it frequently enough, or you can default back to the gasoline. We currently do not have any of these vehicles. And then the last vehicle, which is like our Nissan Leaf, is fully and only all electric, so it does not have a gas tank and you cannot operate it in that manner. Really high level, there are a lot of different benefits to electrifying our transportation, both internally. I know we have a lot of commitments, but for the community as well. From a workplace standpoint and advancing our workforce and the knowledge within our own organization, to economic development opportunities and reduced risks of oil spills, there are a number of benefits. One that I'll call specific attention to is the benefit of public health to our community. So not only does this assist in our internal goals, but it does help improve public health for our community, particularly from the standpoint of air pollution. So in Pinellas County, traditional combustion vehicles are the primary contributor to reduced air quality and therefore reduced health outcomes for our community members. And we just like to point out that this is also an issue of economic and climate justice, as it typically impacts disproportionately individuals of color and or low income. So there are numerous benefits to supporting EV adoption throughout the community. Generally, looking at some trends moving forward, I think the biggest takeaway from this slide here is that second graph where the two lines are intersecting, and that just shows that at some point between 2035 and 2040, there will be more electric vehicles sold in the United States than traditional ICE vehicles. And so we want to make sure that as we move forward, we are anticipating and getting ahead of that curve, so that we are able to provide the infrastructure for our community that is needed. And we can't expect to up to 35% of all cars on Florida roads to be electric by 2040 or plug-in by 2040. So here you can see a picture of all of the current public charging stations in the city of Largo. This does not account for private stations that individuals have at their own home and things like that. You will see that within the city of Largo, we own and operate 7 of those. The other ones tend to fall outside of the city of Largo. There might be, I think, a couple that are within Largo limits that are public, but largely public within our limits are our own. Looking at the trends of within Tampa Bay, it's estimated that between now and 2025, which is a very short time frame, we're going to need approximately 100 additional public charging stations to keep up with the pace of EV adoption in the community. And so we need 100 new stations a year publicly available. That's a fairly rapid pace that we want to make sure we're keeping up with as a community. Just a quick note here.
Excuse me, sorry. Was that stat for the Bay Area or is that for Largo?
That's Tampa Bay area as a whole, so 100 each year within Tampa Bay.
Up to 20.
100 per year.
Yes, 100 per year each year between now and 2025, and that is again for public and not private. So that doesn't account for what people install at their homes or any other private installations.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
No, absolutely fine. I'm happy to take any questions. Just really quickly wanted to show here, this is actually our level 3 charging station over at Largo Central Park, or CPAC. That's got really, really wonderful usage. So these are uploaded pictures from a couple of the individuals that routinely use this. This is part of our overall strategic plan in support with the LEAP as well. And so we know that there's a number of initiatives that increasing our adoption of EV infrastructure would support. And so then to pivot a little bit to EV readiness, so really understanding what does that mean, and are there different types of EV readiness. So EV readiness is simply a policy that requires a certain amount of parking spaces to be either EV ready or EV equipped. And we'll go through that difference in a moment. But the most important part of EV readiness is to reduce the overall cost of implementing the charging stations, because it's much more cost effective to implement prior to or during construction than after something has been completed. And there are 3 tiers of readiness. So this can get a little tricky thinking about different types of charging stations and levels of readiness. But the first level is called EV capable, and you see on that top line where it really just requires you to have expanded panel space and the conduit, so the lining there to be ready in the future. EV ready is where you have the panel space and the conduit, and you additionally include the wiring and a socket at the place where installation will be. And then the final is the EV installed, where a charging station as well as all of the other elements are included. So when you think about EV readiness, thinking about which tier is most beneficial, you don't necessarily want to have EV installed at a multi-family home for 20 spaces to meet the needs in 2050 if that's not something they need right now. You want to make sure it's cost effective as well. And then the 3 levels of chargers. Level 1, it's what my husband and I use at home for our Chevy Volt. We just plug it into the wall at night and let it charge overnight. It takes about 8 to 20 hours depending on the vehicle. Level 2 are the most common ones that you see. You might use these when you're going shopping, going to the mall, going to the movies. Some individuals have it on their single-family homes as well, a lot of multi-family units. Those take about 4 to 8 hours. And then lastly, the fast chargers, or the level 3s. We do, again, have one of those at Largo Central Park. I believe that's the only one within the City of Largo limits at the moment. And those can take as few as 30 minutes to completely charge a vehicle. And currently, looking at EV readiness across the state, there are a number of local governments that already have policies. So those are going to be your blue dots on the map. So that's going to be your southeast corner of Florida as well as St. Petersburg. I believe Clearwater might also have some as well, if that's correct.
Yes, they do. They, in their US 19 special area plan, they have adopted some.
And then you see there in the greens some Orange County and in that area they're considering some policies as well. And then there are a couple with just the EV ready as opposed to the EV installed. And there's a lot on this slide here, but we really just want to focus on the graph there with the 2 different levels of costs for implementation. So an average cost for new construction is too far away for me to read, but it looks like less than $1,000. You see that? Yeah, a little less than $1,000, and you'll see that waiting until after construction, you can increase the cost by over 75% for how much it would take to do everything from run the boring, run the conduit, install the wiring, getting the permitting, updating your fuse box, all of those things. So it definitely is incentivized to do this during new construction. So what are those typical costs? So if we specifically look at multifamily and commercial, if you make something that's EV capable, again, that's just the conduit and the box there. During construction, it might cost you $200 to $800 roughly, and you can save anywhere from about 50 to 85% of that cost by doing it at that time, as opposed to retrofitting it, which could cost upwards of $5,000. going to EV ready, which also makes sense to anticipate future growth at certain developments. You could spend anywhere up to $1,300, maybe even up to $1,500 or $1,600 to install at that point, and you can have costs that increase anywhere from 25 to 80% or more on retrofit. And then EV installed, which is making sure that you have the capability to meet now the current needs of residents. Cost during construction, it says anywhere up to about $1,800. I would argue it's a little bit higher than that. It depends on the type of charger you're buying. So for example, the level 2s that we have, say out front of City Hall, cost a few $1,000s for the equipment itself. But it would still, all of the permitting, all of the wiring and everything like that would definitely fall within that range. And then of course the retrofit costs would be much greater than that. And lastly, just trying to put this into context within what we're doing as an organization more broadly. Of course, our strategic plan and our focus on sustainability, as well as our focus on LEAP, implementing EV charging stations throughout the community would align with that very well and support a lot of the adoption among individuals. I'm just thinking about someone at a multifamily complex. If you have a car and you need to replace it, you're thinking about getting an electric vehicle, but there's no charging station. There's no incentive for you to purchase an electric vehicle. So by not having those installed, there's really no reason for individuals in these types of facilities to want or even be able to get an electric vehicle. And then a number of other benefits, of course, from avoiding costly retrofits to environmental and public health benefits. I think that is it. So if there's any questions now or during Alicia's presentation about what is EV adoption at different levels, what do the different charging stations do, I'll be happy to answer those.
I'm going to switch us over to the second presentation, which gets into a little bit more of the approach moving forward. And thank you, Laura, for that useful information. It feeds right into this presentation. So the first thing is that one of the most important steps is coming up with a game plan that addresses policy, regulation, administration, programs, and leadership. These 5 components were addressed by the Great Plains Institute, and I think they can be used in guiding our steps forward. Some of the examples would be having public fleets, electric public fleets, and then also making sure that the permitting processes are clear, transparent, and making sure that we're behind our standards that we implement. And as Laura said, it's really important to account for the cost. So requiring the EV infrastructure up front during the construction is much more impactful and cost effective than asking for it after the fact. So it's just really important to make sure that we address that because the developers, once they come in, it is a lot easier and more cost effective for them to do it right away rather than do the retrofit. So some city facts, Laura may have mentioned this already, but 80% of individuals charge at home. And it's really important that we look at multifamily properties and ensuring that they have the same accessibility and equity to be able to charge their vehicles should they have them. That is something that we should be looking at as part of our standards that are implemented.
May I ask, what is 80% individuals? You're saying, what would that be in a number? Do you actually know how many people have their own chargers?
So whether that's a specific charger or kind of like we do, or we just plug into the wall, the studies have shown that approximately 80% of all individuals with plug-in hybrids or EVs charge those vehicles at their home.
So it's not that we know. If we don't know the number. I mean,
right.
I understand the way that looks is as if we know in the city that there are people right? Do you know what I'm saying, how that looks?
Yeah.
That's
it's just-
stating, with the same city facts, it looks as though we know exactly how many people have electric vehicles and are charging them at home. That's how that reads to me. So that's why I was asking.
Yeah,
Then
no.
what is that 80%?
Thank you for that. That actually, it isn't city specific, so that's the larger percent of people that have the electric vehicles that are charging in general.
Do we know? I guess, as a.
Could we pull that data? I don't know.
The state does not record that data any longer, and so that is not something that we're able to get. The best we have is FDOT's projections for statewide.
And then permits for installing like level 2 if they got a permit. Like
If they
folks
got a
that
permit.
Just plug into a 120, they never pull a permit.
Correct.
Yeah, I have level 2 at home, and I'll tell you, you want an electrician to do that.
Yeah.
So they would pull the permit, yeah.
That's how it reads.
Cost of a permit installment, do we have costs?
Actually, I'm not sure. I believe it's based on the value of the project. So I know that they have like a tiered process for determining those costs, but I could get back to you on specific.
I'm curious, could we waive something like that to get more?
Well, actually, that might be one of the incentives that you all want to move forward and have us look into anyway, because that is something that can be used as a great incentive is possibly waiving or reducing permits.
And I don't know how representative this is of the actual cost, but yeah, I saw a level 2 charger that was advertised for like $1,500.
I paid a lot less than that for mine, and
Okay.
it's name brand, it's not off-brand, it's a GE. And,
Oh, okay, good.
And I think I bought it off of Amazon and then hired an electrician to put it in for $600, $650.
How much was the permit?
I think he rolled that into his fee.
Pay sales tax?
Good question, though.
No, I didn't have to at the time. It was a few years ago. Who knows? I can't remember that stuff.
Along the same lines as permits, I know we're talking about multifamily to a large extent. Years ago, we were talking about requiring new single-family homes to, and I'm not sure, I don't think we ever did, but requiring single-family homes that are new constructions to be solar ready. So I think that might be an opportunity for like an incentive. You save $100, $200 on your total permit, which is probably a drop in the bucket, but it doesn't cost that much to run conduit to your garage for EV ready, or EV capable, and into the attic for solar ready, just from your panel. It costs a couple $100 when you're building the house, and save you thousands when you decide to go solar or to put an electric charger in your garage.
Yeah, and a couple of things that I'm sure Alicia will kind of get us to as well is, one, when you install in a multifamily unit, you are able to make that be a fee to be able to utilize it. The fee is traditionally less than using the cost of a gas-powered vehicle. So those units and developers are able to recoup some of the cost that's associated with that. And then additionally, we're still waiting to hear the final status of some state legislation that's going through, including House Bill 410, which would prohibit requirements related to design standards for energy
We're not leaving
infrastructure.
it up to the individual cities.
Shocker.
So,
Wait, what?
While it would not impact multifamily units, we believe, at least initially, that we would not be able to make requirements on single-family homes because of the building code.
We could do incentives.
And then we can do requirements for parking standards for other non-single-family homes.
So we'll be definitely monitoring that to see how it might impact potential standards, but that's just one of the bills that we are monitoring. And then do you want to share it was Senate Bill 850 856, I think. But it only applies to really gas stations. So we didn't see that that would be a significant issue for moving forward with any kind of standard. So we're just trying to make sure that we monitor them and follow up and make sure it has no impacts on any standards that we propose. So just some more facts. Approximately 20 publicly available charging stations from level 1 through 3 in the city of Largo. And you can see on this table the number of uses. We actually have really high usage rates, as Laura was saying. And possibly, I put in here moving towards electric fleet. I'm sure you're aware of the police efforts to have 2 of their motorcycles are now electric. So we also have the community engagement electric vehicle that's used quite frequently. So just making sure that we show that we're moving towards electric fleet is important. And other communities, they've specifically pointed that out, that is a goal of theirs. So I included that.
I'd like to point out that Ulmer Park had 65, and that charging station was closed for the entire project for the downtown, where they rewired downtown. So that is an artificially low number.
Yeah. Well, if you can imagine if we didn't have the pandemic, how much higher that would be too, because there were a lot fewer people going on.
And this is only through February 2021. So these numbers only represent through February, so they're higher. And then I just wanted to mention that last year, this was actually a big accomplishment of the city. There were EV parking space engineering design standards that were published by our city on July 7th, 2020, which is a really big first step in addressing and getting ready for EV infrastructure. So that has been completed. And so we are looking to move forward on standards, and this was just one accomplishment that occurred last year. And so this is the same information that Laura had on the other slide, but I just wanted to bring it up again because staff is going to be diving into some of these other communities in terms of what's working for them, what's not working for them, what standards they have in place, what are they considering. It's really important to get a good idea of what's going on in Florida and in other states, and kind of better understand what is being adopted and what's working for them. So staff is prepared to be diving into this further. We did do an initial research, a little bit of a research on some local examples like Coral Gables. I'm not sure if this is too small for you to see, but Coral Gables is a really good example because they have a specific percentages of ready, capable, and installed for developments requiring over 20 off-street parking spaces. So they have adopted these standards, and they have to be at a level 2 station. So we felt like that was a good local Florida example for us to look at. And then another one is Miami Beach. Miami Beach also created minimum EV space requirements, but has identified the need for specific uses such as multifamily and hotels to have future power supply infrastructure. And this is more what staff was thinking in terms of identifying specific uses that are more appropriate or maybe could be incentivized more. Multifamily hotels, locations where you would be more likely to be charging, especially with the data showing 80% of the population with the vehicles are charging at home. So we want to make sure that we tie it to uses if possible. So this was another good example. And then St. Pete, of course, is leading the way. They are actively moving towards, this is actually what they've already adopted. So they have adopted EV standards for their parking garages. And you can see here, it is tiered, and it's certain percent is capable and certain percent is ready, and then commercial, 2% of them are required to be installed. So this has already been adopted, but they are proposing on this slide moving forward with something a little bit more progressive and having more EV ready panel capacity, conduit wiring, and outlet for specific uses. So they're going to tie it to the single family, multifamily, hotels and motels, and other commercial. And so they're looking at about a 15 to 20% of the spaces, and then one space per single family. And then also having the installed would be a smaller percent, but it just gives the ability to grow into the future as they become more widespread. So we were going to also closely monitor and see what happens with St. Petersburg and what their challenges are, if they have any local pushback or development concerns. And so I mentioned this already, but Clearwater does have in the US 19 district one off-street parking space requirement. And this is actually a really good incentive for developers. We had a developer forum on April 21st of this year, and we were asking the developers to provide us some input on how they felt about electric vehicle charging stations, if there was other local incentives offered by other communities that they felt were worthwhile. And actually they all agreed at that meeting that if we could provide a reduction in parking spaces based on how many electric vehicle spaces they provide, that's a great incentive for them, because a lot of them struggle, especially in downtown areas where you're really limited on parcel size, to fit all of the parking that they need for multifamily and commercial sites. So Clearwater has a great example where they're using that incentive. And so these are just some of the incentives we mentioned that we would like to explore. Streamlined charger permitting process, maybe quicker turnaround, expedited review, that kind of thing, expedited inspections, just really streamlining that process and making it a cleaner process for the applicants, possibly looking into maybe permit reductions or waivers. Reduction in required parking spaces, and then density intensity bonus incentives, which is actually, we have a team currently, a microbusiness that our sustainability microbusiness is looking into implementing more of like a bonus tiered process for Tri-City and other areas of the city. But what they're looking to do is make sure that there's proper density and intensity bonus options for developments that are looking to have EV capable and EV ready infrastructure. So that team is actively exploring it at the moment. So that's a great incentive option. And any other options that you can think of, we have had other staff members mention grants. And so maybe exploring other options would be appropriate. So go to the next slide. The first approach, that leads me to the two approaches that staff have come up with. One of them is more of a phased approach. And what we would suggest is that we look to the 3 activity centers first and then implement citywide based on feedback from and input collected from the activity centers being implemented first. The pros would be that we would have the ability to do a little bit more outreach and monitoring of other communities' experiences and challenges, because it a little bit stretches the time frame for the citywide implementation, and we can kind of use the activity centers as the pilot project. The cons is that it would be a little bit more of a slower implementation for the citywide standards. So this is just a draft time frame to kind of share and get your feedback on, but essentially 2021 to 22 would be an engagement and outreach. It would be the drafting of the incentives for those activity centers and multimodal corridors. We could have stakeholder engagement and education at that time, and closely monitor what other communities are doing and to conduct outreach to them as well. And then we'd look at 2022 to 23, phase 1, which would be the adoption of standards for the activity centers and multimodal corridors. And we can do another round of stakeholder engagement in drafting citywide standards and better understand what challenges the developers and applicants had in the activity centers and multimodal corridors. And then lastly, 2024 to 25 would be the adoption of standards and incentives citywide. So that was one approach that we felt you would want to give us a little bit more direction on. If you chose that approach, it is a little bit slower, but it is phased, so it gives us an opportunity to see how it's going to work in the activity centers and multimodal corridors, where we really want to focus a lot of the development anyway. The second approach would be a little bit more of a faster timeline with more immediate citywide standards. And the pros of this one is that it is more aggressive, and we would have the ability to get ahead of the local charging station needs since it's moving pretty quick. And then also the cons would be the inability to address challenges of a target area first, and potentially having to change some of the standards based on what happens with some of the bills we're following.
Curiosity.
Yeah.
First approach, seeing what Tallahassee has a habit of doing, are we gonna go through all this, go slow, and then try to get our plan, and then Tallahassee pulls another hoodwink on us, and then we're holding the bag on a plan because we had it there, where this kind of gets it there before they can implement, we're already going.
Right. Yeah, there's kind of pros and cons to each. If we wait too long and we test it with activity centers and multimodal corridors, there is a chance that, it delays the city-wide standards implementation, depending on what gets passed. So that is a risk going with approach 1. And then just quickly, the timeline for approach number 2 would be 2021 to 22, engagement and outreach. That is when we would want to go ahead and draft the standards and incentives citywide, and then implementation 22 to 23. So it would get started right away, and we would be looking either approach. We're looking to draft standards. It just depends on whether or not it would be for the activity centers and multimodal corridor or citywide, if we want to just go right to that step. I will say that we did adopt, as part of the Tri-City Special Area Plan, back in February, we did adopt standards for that activity center and that multimodal corridor to require 1 parking space. And it's based on the size of the square footage of the building or the number of units. But there really wasn't anything else to it. It was just 1 space. So we may actually have to adjust the activity center requirements depending on what we implement citywide, because you really wouldn't want to have more standards outside of an activity center than inside. So we will take that into account and revisit that. But
That one space was installed, am I correct?
Yes, it is installed, yep. And actually, it's 1 charging station.
Could be.
2 spaces, so I think on either side, you would have the spaces. And that's actually the end of my presentation, so I was just going to open it up to get some more direction, to see, if you would rather either of the approaches or none of them, and you have different thoughts on how we should move forward. I would like to begin drafting and working on standards to bring back to you in the November-December timeframe, just so we can do our research and come up with a good plan for Largo. So that is our initial timeline for having some standards drafted and brought back to you. But we are open to any suggestions, thoughts on incentives and approaches.
Would your what you just said with November, December, would option 2 affect that?
So it would be the same for actually either approach. We'd like to bring draft standards back by the end of the year, and it's either going to be citywide standards or the activity center and multimodal corridor. Or if you have, another thought process and you'd like us to go a different direction, we're not stuck with these options.
So I had a couple of questions, well, kind of comments, suggestions maybe. Frankly, I'm happy with either one or two. But I see some benefit to phasing it in a little bit. One of the things that I'm concerned about is Tallahassee. So Tallahassee generally doesn't and a lot of the times when they preclude cities from making their own standards, they kind of grandfather in existing things, right? So if we were to pass a phased approach, so this ordinance is to have activity centers have some standards that are enacted this, and then at a date certain it goes citywide. Maybe the attorney would have to get involved, but I suspect that would be an existing ordinance that might, even though it's not enacted yet, might fall into the grandfathered thing. So that was one thing that kind of came to mind as far as if we're going to phase it in. The other thing that I was thinking is, if we do option 1, I think the incentives should be citywide from day one. So if the incentives are going to be in the activity centers and the multimodal corridors, they should also exist citywide, and the standards maybe should be phased in activity centers first and then citywide. That's what I jotted down where it's on. So, anybody else?
I've got a minute.
Right.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say something.
We're here all night.
Just
Don't
a
worry about it.
Just a quick comment is that I think I had mentioned to Mr. Schubert and at one of our events or something, I had watched a special about charging stations, and they were actually focused on the southeast, so many of the cities that you had as examples, because it was also just talking about the resiliency of cities and looking at the amount of hurricanes, looking at how much erosion, things that have happened over time, and kind of forecasting out. And I think I said to Mr. Schubert, I thought what was interesting there is that they were looking at, when they were looking at where they were placing their charging stations, and maybe in conversations you guys have already had this, is that where their water levels come up, let's say in a storm, are their placement of their charging stations in the paths of where their storm waters rise come, or are they placing them in a safer location where they don't have that 8-foot surge from tropical storm XYZ, or if it is a hurricane, or things of that sort. So it was something I just hadn't really thought about when we're talking about it, because I guess we're kind of, knock on wood, lucky. But it'd be interesting to see if they are, with those cities that you've already contacted, how they are planning for that, or taking that into consideration. Because I think what I'd seen was just about in global warming and everything in general about how Florida is and has changed, and they brought that up, and it was just something I just hadn't really thought about when we were looking at this and where our placement is, and many of those cities in that southeast,
Are right there.
yeah,
right,
for them
yeah,
it's probably a little more
yeah,
than for us. Yeah.
No, that's definitely something we can look into and see what they're doing to kind of mitigate that.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just as simple as if it's in a parking garage, that they make sure they elevate it or
Right.
something. So we can definitely look into
It
that.
just was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
That was a. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There was one other thing before Commissioner Robinson gets wound up. When I looked at the cost for during construction or retrofitting, The real savings seems to be in that capable. If you make it capable during construction, it costs a couple $100 per spot. If you want to do that as a retrofit, it costs thousands, like $5,000. And then the cost above that to install the thing is another a couple $1,000s. So if you spend that $200 or $300 up front, the cost to get a charging station on site isn't that much more than if you would have done it at the very beginning. Do you understand what I'm saying? And I think the cost of that equipment is probably going down as the demand becomes more and people are building that stuff. So I would lean heavily. I think that you should have some spots where people can plug in when the product is built, if it's a multifamily. But I would also lean heavily towards encouraging or mandating, encouraging a lot of capable, enough capable for future years, and that because the savings is going to be there for it's not going to cost them $500 or $5,000 a spot. It's going to cost them a few hundred a spot, and they're going to, in the end, when in 10 years they realize the market is demanding it, it's going to be cost effective for them to go ahead and install that in there. And if they don't do that, they're not going to do it down the road. Vice Mayor Robinson, do you have anything to add?
Sure. Ready? So, no, I'm just kidding. I had a whole lot of things I wanted to talk about, but you guys did a fantastic presentation, and a lot of the stuff that I wanted to talk about, you guys covered, so you're safe. Is it possible to go to the St. Pete example that you had showed a couple minutes ago, the second example you had showed? There.
Here we go.
I think that's the one. So that's from what I've seen and some of the examples that I've seen from the Southeast and throughout the state. This is one of the ones I like the best. I think it has a good mix. I do agree with your statement though that we should have an absolute standard for EV capable. I think everything should have some sort of standard for EV capable at the very minimum. And then moving forward, I like this example for something that we could do here in Largo. I think from my opinion, it's a good place for us to be. Yeah, I think the mayor's comments as far as being EV capable are very the numbers show itself out. So I think we can definitely have those standards in place, but I would like to see, installed and ready as an option in multifamily. Obviously, single family, we have some concerns over because of some proposed legislation, but multifamily, hotels, motels, and any parking garages, definitely should have. I think probably installed and ready at some level. Right? Well, more spaces ready, and then have there's more spaces outside of that ready to put, or I guess capable. When you said you had a meeting with some developers recently, or some sort of developers conference.
And it was pertaining to the Tri-City Special Area Plan standards that were implemented. We did have a meeting with them and shared the new standards that were adopted in March.
Yes.
And at the time, we felt it was appropriate to go ahead and ask them their thoughts on EV charging stations and what they've seen and experienced in other communities. So we did hold that in April.
So what was kind of the feedback you received at that point regarding this?
Actually, there wasn't a whole lot of pushback from the development. They were letting us know about what Clearwater does, and that if we were to go that route, that they would really appreciate incentives being tied to it. So whether that's a density bonus or whether that's a reduction in parking. We have had developers in Largo struggle with meeting the parking requirements in downtowns.
I mean, I think that was actually one of the things I had written down during your presentation. The incentives we have to have. I think, maybe a whole list of incentives. You could do a density bonus, you could do a reduction in parking. I think having several options or multiple choices for people, if they, depending on how many spots or what type of spots they put in, they could, kind of check off different incentives. I think that's a good option. If we're going to push towards this, I think having every available option is something that, why not have it, right? When in just generally talking about parking, I think, I don't know what our standards are, but if you go to some larger box stores in Largo, there are a huge number of unused parking spaces that will never be used. And that has zero to do with this conversation we're having today, but it just kind of popped into my head that a great example is the Walmart out on Roosevelt 19. There's just probably 100 or 200 spots out there that'll never be used, right? So, and that's a huge amount of money that somebody has to use, in order to, have that space available, right?
I think those numbers have changed, though.
They have gone down, I think, in the time that I've been here, but I'm just saying maybe we should readdress, not tonight.
I'm with you, totally. More people are riding Ubers, and that's only
Sure.
going to get more and more.
And that's going to continue to grow, right? That's a kind of a part of this conversation, but not really for tonight. So, those are kind of the things I really want to talk about. I think it's obviously we've had this conversation before. We had it when we talked about the Tri-City, special area plan out there. It's something that I would love to see. As far as I think the options that you have shown us tonight, the two different options for implementing this, personally, I would love to see it right now, right? I agree with the mayor, though, that if we decide to go route one, which might be a little bit more palatable for developers as well as this commission, and I'm okay with that. I think by opening up some incentives citywide, that might help us get to the point of the number of chargers that we're going to need here in Largo a little bit quicker, right? Because we're looking at a 2025 implementation. But by opening up the incentive citywide, it might help us get to that number. So that's kind of where I land on this. Personally, I would love to see it happen today. Probably not going to happen today. So let's make it a little easier and more palatable for developers to start it in some of our SAPs and then see what the market calls for after that. Thank you.
Along the incentives, the density bonus and the reduced parking, I've long advocated for more avenues to get higher density in activity centers outside West Bay Drive, because that's the only one that has anything other than affordable housing, which I'm fine. I'm happy with affordable housing, but there's a lot of other things that we'd like to see developers do in our activity center. So I think, tomorrow, as soon as we can, let's especially in our activity centers, allow them to gain more density by putting charging stations in. I would prefer that increased density available be limited to activity centers and commercial corridors, not outside of that. Things like reduction in parking requirements, I think, could go citywide. So we might want to kind of look at that. There's some, types of developments that we want to encourage in our activity centers, and we don't necessarily want to encourage in our residential, traditional residential neighborhoods outside of those activity centers. And that's, the higher density type stuff. So that's kind of where I fall with that. I agree with what Vice Mayor said on kind of fast tracking and moving forward, and let's get it done. And I'd like to look at the single family home incentives as well, both solar and electric vehicle.
As usual, I got a couple of really bizarre questions. When we're putting a number of required parking spaces on the table, which I think is a good thing, and allowing for a reduction as an incentive, I just would make sure that we're very careful on the whole topic to make sure there's adequate parking for the number of residents especially in places where there's going to be multi-car families. There are neighborhoods, single-family residential neighborhoods around our community where there is not adequate parking for 2 cars in the driveway without getting across the sidewalk or parking, the teenager parking in the street. And it's kind of an abstract thing, but I don't want to forget about it. And the other is, I'm just kind of curious, you know, you guys are mentioning some of the big block stores and commercial developments that sometimes seem to have a large number of disabled parking spots that go unused often. And I wondered, it made me wonder if there's any pressure from anywhere, the state or whatever, to install these charging stations in places that are handicap spots. Is that a topic that's been discussed?
So our level 3 charging station is handicap accessible or ADA accessible. Currently, there are no state standards or design requirements for ADA accessibility on these units. We do anticipate, and we can revisit with engineering and what they've already put forward, but we do anticipate to incorporate that as necessary.
I'm just curious because, you know, the required proximity to the entrance to a building and so forth. It comes to mind something like, for example, Largo Med Center, you know, in their current parking lot. You know, would they be, if that were a new development, would there be a requirement to make sure we had EV-capable spots there?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I know that the Tri-Cities special area plan, we did require that one of their spaces be ADA accessible, one of the EV spaces.
Thank you.
And is that space a dedicated handicap parking spot, or is it just accessible?
Well, actually, I have the language. At least one space must meet ADA parking dimension and accessibility requirements, but not restricted to ADA parking only.
Okay. Yeah, because I saw the ADA or handicap logo on the standards that the city had, so I kind of had some questions. It almost looked as if there was going to be a handicap spot and a traditional spot required. So what's going to happen is one has to be wide enough for a van or whatever, and the other one can be a standard size spot, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Just to provide that accessibility.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. I told you I had a weird question.
Yeah, that's good.
But that means that anybody can park in it.
Anybody can park there, yeah, but
It has
it's
to be
wider
the
so that.
standards.
I just wanted to make the comment that, and I think the Commissioner Smith was alluding to a little bit ago, you know, the quicker we can get through this, I know it's very, there's a lot on your all's end to do once you do get direction from us, but the quicker we can get this through and into an ordinance would be very beneficial for the city of Largo, because I can see it coming next year, that as that list that you showed earlier grows for cities in the state of Florida that are putting these ordinances in place, developers are going to go to the legislature and say this is killing our business, and the legislature is going to turn around and tell us we can't do that anymore, just like every other thing that they did this year. So again, the quicker we can do, and not to, you know, I know you guys all have full plates, but yeah, again, the more, excuse me? Yeah, thank you. The more aggressive we can be with this, would be the better.
You thinking vacation rentals, is that coming
I've
along?
got a list. Let's go over those.
And if it's possible to lay out when it's going citywide in that ordinance, I think do that. So it's passed and ready and it's coming.
I think we can, oops, go ahead.
This is going to really be an off-the-wall question, but have you seen anywhere where there have been incentives for existing businesses to retrofit and add charging stations in established businesses or locations, multifamily units?
I'm not aware of, just from looking at other communities, I'm not aware of any yet.
Yeah.
Would be interesting to investigate and see if there's any way that you can incentivize existing businesses, existing multifamily businesses to do it.
Yeah, I think multifamily is the key word there.
Yeah.
You know, 80% of folks charge at home, so putting it at an existing Aldi, for example, is probably not gonna get the type of use as if you're able to put a couple spots at a 10-year-old apartment complex that doesn't have them now.
Yeah, and because they're going to be very desirable.
And I did have a thought, if we meet with our city attorney and it turns out that we can't draft an ordinance with, implementation dates or standards to grandfather that in just in case a bill passes, and does that change your mind about which approach would that impact?
I don't think so. They're not gonna outlaw incentives.
Right.
I would suspect that most of our multifamily redevelopment is gonna happen in our activity centers anyway, unless somebody goes in and buys a bunch of houses in the neighborhood. So I don't think it'd be that detrimental if the state legislature or, our attorney says we can't do what we were thinking about doing, and the state legislature changes the rules next year. It's not gonna be that detrimental. I think that the bulk of the multifamily development is gonna happen in our activity centers on purpose.
Is it possible to take approach number one and accelerate it a little bit? Instead of 2025, maybe make it 2024 or 2023?
Yes, there is a little bit of a cushion that we placed into there. Let me show you.
So that was a cushion you put in there so we could ask this question, and you could say,
Of
sure, we
course.
can do that.
There is okay, so.
Great sales approach.
So that last year, you'll see it goes from 22 to 23 for phase one. It could really go 23 to 24 for phase two. The only reason we built in that additional time frame was so that we could really just evaluate the impacts with the developers and the impacts of all the standards that were adopted. So that can be bumped up.
We could be, kind of having that back and forth between developers and checking on it the entire time, right?
Yeah, you can have that during
Community
phase one.
engagement, yeah.
Yep.
I like that idea. I think if we could bump that up a little bit, I'd be 100% in favor of that.
So that would actually put you at completion of approach one by 2024, which really isn't that much different because this option is just a year sooner, but at least it would give us an opportunity to kind of test it in the activity centers and make sure we come up with the right incentives for those areas.
Agreed.
By the way, I think I saw in Clearwater's guidelines, as far as giving parking space incentives, I think they capped it.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
They did
Up to 8, I think it's.
Yeah, right.
And
Right, I think you have the direction you need, right?
for clarity, I did want to ask on a comment that you had, and I think going back to some conversation a while ago, did you mention that you wanted solar incentives for single-family homes as well, or we just want to look at, I don't want to give us more work, we just want to look at the electric vehicle section?
I mean, personally, if it's an incentive, I think you bundle it. If you do solar and it's 8 feet of conduit, maybe a little farther depending on how far your panel is from your garage, but it's not a whole lot of investment for a single, and there's not a ton of single-family new home construction happening. But if we can incentivize it, it's going to cost them a few $100s to be solar capable and EV capable, whatever that consists of. I mean, I would suspect that it consists of running conduit to the garage and running conduit into the attic, and you're done from your panel, and having a panel that's sized right.
Right, and I think they'd have to upgrade their panel anyway if they were to get the EV or the solar. I think they have to look at a potential panel upgrade.
Right.
We didn't.
You
We didn't
didn't?
have to upgrade our panel.
You had a
Right, but
Lucky.
but you had the
No,
electrician looking at it though.
No, the electricians really wanted to put
You
in a
pulled
new
a permit,
panel.
you probably would have had to.
Because you hooked into the neighbor's meter.
The extension cord just went.
Jim Bob's Electric out there
All
doing
that
it.
pirate power.
But I'll tell you, we had solar in already, and there was a consideration when they put in the charging station. They had to take a look at how to be able to balance it with the solar. So making solar and EV capable from the start is a very good idea.
Okay, and thank you so much. We'll look at this, and we have a team that's going to be taking a look at other communities as well. And our target is to bring back something to the commission November, December, and be able to get your feedback on those standards.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Good. Excellent.
Does anybody have any board or committee reports? I know we've got some events coming up.
You know, I got some stuff to talk about. On May 22nd, the Suncoast League of Cities will be having its legislative awards reception. I think everybody in this room just about is registered for that, and so thank you guys for, I think that I heard today that like 18 people from Largo are coming, so that's about, out of, I think 60 or 70 that are gonna be there. That's a lot. So good job.
You got the tomatoes, right?
Yes.
You're in
Mike's-
charge of the tomatoes, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And right before that, the PSTA will be moving its AVA, which is the autonomous vehicle that it was in St. Pete prior to the Grand Prix down there, up to Dunedin. For the first week or two, it's going to be running in front of the Blue Jay Stadium because the Rays are actually playing the Blue Jays at Dunedin Stadium, so they're going to have some, transportation there. The ribbon cutting grand opening for that is May 19th. If you guys want any information on, I'd be happy to send that to you. After that first week or so, it's going to actually move to Dunedin's downtown and run downtown. And if you haven't been on it, if you haven't had an opportunity and weren't able to make it to St. Pete, please try to get to Dunedin. I think it goes from there to Clearwater. It's going to go to Clearwater Beach after that. If you haven't ridden in an autonomous vehicle, it's
Really scary.
it's not scary. No, it's not. I wouldn't say scary. It's surreal though. But
How do we get that in Largo? I think I've said before, you really want to test an
we need to
autonomous
start getting
vehicle,
some
put
of
it on
these
Elmerton Road.
SAPs up and running, and then we can get some of these things into Largo. But yeah, so May 19th is the ribbon cutting for that. It's right there by the Dunedin Blue Jay Stadium. So looking forward to that as well. That's all I have for committee reports.
Thank you.
We
What day
left
of the week
something
is
out,
19th?
though.
The 19th is not on my calendar.
It's Wednesday.
It's a Wednesday? There you go.
So that's not just a banquet on the 22nd, right? It's a coronation, right?
Installation, coronation.
It's an installation. I don't know about a coronation.
That's awesome.
All right,
Congratulations.
any other board or committee reports? Very good. Commissioner Carroll, do you have anything this evening?
Only to say that it's National Police Week, and tomorrow at 11 o'clock at the Sheriff's Office, there will be a memorial service. This is the first time in the history of Pinellas County Sheriff's Office they have to add a name to their memorial down there with the loss of their deputy. And that ceremony involves several volleys of gunfire, in case you get any phone calls about that. Other than that, nothing.
11
Starts at
o'clock.
11, yeah.
Commissioner Smith? Vice Mayor Robinson?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say was there was some really good conversation tonight, and I'm extremely happy that we were able to have that conversation. I know we joked back and forth about how much I talk, or maybe you guys weren't joking, I don't know, but.
Not when you're here.
Yeah. But I also wanted to say that
Your 3 minutes is almost up.
we're getting there. So while there were definitely some difference in opinion of several subjects this evening, the conversation was very cordial, and everybody can appreciate everybody else's opinion. And at the end of the day, we all know that we want Largo to be a better place. And I really appreciate every one of you guys for being, so well respecting of each other and having a great conversation. So I just want to say thank you all for that.
Back at you.
Thank you, yeah.
Hugs all around.
Yeah.
Commissioner Gerard?
Thank you, by the way, Vice Mayor Robinson, thanks for those words. It was really wonderful, and I feel the same way. I know emotions can run high, but at the end of the day, we all respect one another, and it's great that we can do that, because there are commissions around that they don't.
A lot of most of them.
And I'm glad to be part of this one. I have something that I was discussing with Mr. Schubert this morning, and this is kind of a pet peeve, but it's a serious topic too. and that's the use of acronyms. And I think you've probably all heard me talk about it before, but especially going through the comprehensive annual financial report, that thing was an alphabet soup of acronyms with no explanation whatsoever they are. And when I was listening to Kim explain, or it was either Kim or it was one of them explaining that the management discussion and analysis is for the average citizen to read so they can understand what's going on. No average citizen is going to get past page 1 without closing and say, I have no idea what they're talking about. It's fun for us, maybe, but not for me. It's extremely frustrating for me. It's an inside baseball thing that everybody knows what the acronyms are, and I know what you don't know, or we can talk our jargon, but it's really harmful to the general public when they try to read something on a website or read a document, and they don't know what in the world we're talking about. I was having a conversation with someone, I won't say who it was, who's been a city employee for decades, doesn't even know what some of these acronyms mean. You know, so here's my request. Here's my request. My request is that in any city document, and you only have to create it one time, to include a glossary of terms, of acronyms, that says what it means and a very brief explanation of what it is. It's just respectful of the citizens who are trying to understand what in the world we're doing. And you only have to do it once, because then it's just a copy and paste, you know, and it would go a long way to having people feel that they're really part of this and they know what's going on and they don't feel shut out. So that's my speech. I tried not to be as long as the vice mayor. That's my speech.
Thank you. And I would say in the comprehensive annual financial report, also known as the CAFR, I don't think it's an intentional thing. These folks have just been in that realm for a long time. I don't think it's I know more than you do type thing. It's just that's their world, and so they think that's normal language. But I certainly understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, I didn't mean to attack anyone as being uncaring. It's just sometimes when you live in this all the time, this is the language that you speak, but not everybody speaks that language.
I think we had something that when I came on the commission, I was kind of given some of all the acronyms. And then when I got on board with Nellis, I did the ACA group, and they provided all of them, so I kind of gave you the example on the side. Maybe in the
It's not for me. It's for everybody. It's for everybody. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a Rosetta Stone, for the citizens.
Right.
Not to drag on about the acronyms, but my first 2.5 to 3 years on the commission, all I did was write down three letters, and then I would go home and Google all of them and write them so that I was like, okay, if I keep writing these, I'll remember
They
what
weren't
they
the same
are.
3 letters.
But
I know what they were.
I can tell you what yours were. And that's all I have.
Mr. Finger.
That's too funny. Thank you. I was similar to what Vice Mayor Robinson said. I would just thank you to everyone for good discussion. It's always it's more enjoyable when we all have something to say or perspectives and such. And we've had many discussions like that, and I don't think anybody walks away in a bad or negative view. So I appreciate that. Also, that thank you to everyone who joined us for our lively discussion this evening, because they did a whole lot of work to provide us with everything, as well as the Finance Advisory Board. We wouldn't have these opportunities without all of the input and time spent, especially by staff as well. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you. The only thing that I had was as mask ordinances are being lifted and more folks are gaining immunity, either through the old-fashioned way or through vaccination. I would recommend that the June 1st meeting, we could all sit back at the front of the room and have a meeting. Certainly, you can wear masks if you want to, and staff, if they want to present in masks, that's fine. Does anybody have any issue with that?
Nope.
Probably for the next meeting, we'll still be spaced out, and June spaced out.
Physically and
Right.
figuratively.
But June 1, we'll be back to our old ways. Mr. Schubert.
I have nothing.
All right.
There's been enough said tonight.
Hey, thanks for all your input tonight, by the way. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Somebody make sure that